Thank you. I'll call to order the Historic Landmarks Commission meeting for Wednesday, January 25th. Begin the meeting with public comment. I have a request to speak slip from Kellum DeForest. Mr. DeForest.
Thank you. It has been brought to the Rural Chase Society's attention that the temporary pedestrian bicycle bridge over Mission Creek between the Lighthouse Building on Cabrillo Boulevard and the ocean was voted by City Council to be made permanent. This utilitarian prefabricated bridge was plunked down across Mission Creek to provide pedestrian and bicycle transit while the new Cabrillo Boulevard Bridge was under construction. Despite the fact the new Cabrillo Bridge is designed to be wide enough to accommodate pedestrians, bicyclists, and trolleys, city staff recommended to the City Council that the temporary bridge be made permanent to save money and to provide additional safety. The City Council, without much notice, approved the bridge's permanent status. The bridge never would have been approved had it been proposed as a permanent structure because everything about it is in conflict with the design guidelines for El Pueblo Viejo, at whose gateway it is situated. The City Council should have been informed about this dramatic inconsistency with the meticulous historic redesigns of the Cabrillo Boulevard Bridge over Mission Creek, which has been a multi-year project. Part of the beauty of Santa Barbara is its unobstructed ocean views. In order to preserve the views and to discourage hunky-tonk commercial development along the beachfront, a group of citizens, including Harold Chase and his sister Pearl Chase, formed the East Beach Improvement Association in 1924. The association proceeded to buy all the beach parcels between then East Boulevard and the ocean and hired designer Charles Chaney of the Olmsted Brothers landscape architectural firm to design an improved East Boulevard with oceanfront landscape. East Boulevard was widened and renamed Cabrillo Boulevard. Palms and lawn were planted. The association then sold the land to the city for a parkway. The temporary bridge interferes with the view of the ocean from Cabrillo Boulevard and compromises the uncluttered view that has existed for almost 100 years. The Pearl Chase Society, dedicated as we are to the preservation of historic sites, respectfully ask that the temporary bridge be removed as originally planned. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeForest. I'll close public comment. I have a question of Mr. Limon, since I have you here. Is the bridge in our purview, or is it under ABR since it's...
It is within your purview.
It is within our purview. Okay.
And as I reported last time, we expect Public Works to come back and actually request that it be a permanent installation.
So that will be in our future.
That's my understanding.
Okay, thank you. Our next item of business is approval of the minutes of the meeting of January 11th, 2017.
So moved. Second.
Suding, and did I hear?
Mahan.
Mahan. Are there any corrections?
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Drury.
Under public comment, I think that what Kellum DeForest talked about, the temporary bridge over Mission Creek, it should also include that Mission Creek at Cabrillo Boulevard, just for clarity's sake.
Okay, thank you. Any other
That's
corrections?
all I have.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Mahan.
on page 7, in the motion, item 2, I found that the way it's worded to be confusing. The second floor and north elevation windows are appropriate for the second and third floor in the rear. I think that particular statement was referring to the fact that some of the windows in the design were proportioned and looked like casement windows, which is appropriate, and some of them were proportioned to look like double hung windows, and we wanted the double hungs to be changed to be in proportion and detail like casements. I think that's what was intended for that, and I don't think that this statement is clear enough.
Okay, so I would suggest in item 2, after the word north elevation, casement windows and their proportion, in parentheses, are appropriate. Is that? In parentheses? Casement appear, and proportion in parentheses. Is that clear enough?
Yeah.
Good.
Thank you.
Any others? I have one on page 4, item 2. There were considerable comments from this commission, and none of them were included. The things that I think should be included in our comments were the concerns about water heaters, trash enclosures, and air conditioning units in the front yard setback. Judy Reyes raised safety concerns about stuff cluttering the side yard setbacks for fire safety and access. We were also expressed concern about the apparent load on both the ABR and ourselves for reviewing these fairly minor items, which we would probably deny in any case. Please include those comments. Are there any others?
No, sir.
All in favor of accepting the minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Suding steps down or abstains from item 5,
And all abstained.
6, 7.
And Brumbaum abstains. Consent calendar, item C on the agenda. Staff?
Item A, 203 Chapala Street was continued 2 weeks with comment to specifically study the shed roof change as they were proposing a deck. Item B, 28 West Figueroa Street received approval of review after final. Item C, 918 Garcia Road received project design approval and final approval.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Can I have a motion to ratify the
So
consent
moved.
calendar? Suding?
Second.
Drury?
Yes.
Drury, second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstain? Motion carries. Announcements, staff?
Judy Arias will be absent today.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Drury?
I have to leave at 5 o'clock.
Okay. Hopefully we'll be done.
Mr. Chair, I have an update on an ordinance committee matter. We've been working with the city attorney's office and the building official to deal with post-disaster regulations for historic buildings. And that's been postponed one more week to February 14th. There will be a staff report and specific questions directed to the ordinance committee for direction on how to draft the ordinance. Again, we expect to return back with the ordinance for the HLC to comment on it also. I just wanted to be aware that you'll be seeing that report come forward sometime next week, possibly.
Great. And do you have anything to tell us about Fermina's position?
Yes. As you are aware, we are shorthanded on the commission. The recruitment period ended, and we did not receive candidates that would be appointed, specifically the architectural historian position and Craig Schallenberger's replacement. So I had questioned whether or not we needed a special recruitment, and I was rebuffed because they indicated to me that that is highly unusual to do a special recruitment just for a body that's short, and essentially said If you're not having quorum problems, you're going to have to wait until mid-year. They do a mid-year recruitment. That still doesn't resolve Fermina's position. So what we're pursuing is possibly having that position be switched and have Mr. Grumbine be appointed to that architectural historian position, because I think he does have qualifications that would merit that position be held in his with his background. So procedurally, we're working with the city attorney to see if we can do that without having to go to council. And that would allow for additional recruitment to be held mid-year. So that's what we're proceeding. So we haven't removed her technically. She was asked to remain just as a contingency until we get the appointment filled.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Subcommittee reports? Are there any?
Should we?
I think we did have a subcommittee
Yes.
report, didn't we?
Yes, we
on
did.
AUD, or
Yes. Would you like me to summarize?
I would like you to summarize.
Okay. We held a meeting to discuss the ABR's version of the compatibility infill design guidelines, and it was quite successful. We were able to consider their potential edits and meld them into the commission's edits. They had some more extensive language, which was supplemented by staff because we felt it needed more introductory language. So where we did a side-by-side comparison of the guidelines where we were in conflict, and I think we were quite successful. I think there were 2 points where the commission or commissioners felt that their language was preferable, and that's how we're going to proceed to the Planning Commission to explain that there are some nuances because each infill guidelines will be inserted in your own appropriate guidelines, so they can be different. Where there was a final conflict between what staff was proposing, we were introducing the concept that if you're outside EPV and you're on the potential list and you haven't been designated with specific boundaries, that you could develop a project on the property and go to the ABR. Now, that was felt to be beyond the scope of our current regulations and introducing a different concept of their understanding, and we've backed off that at this point. Now, the problem
Thank you.
is that we have projects that are outside EPV that have properties that are on the potential list, yet we have developments completely surrounding those developments or those existing structures that are technically outside your purview. And we have actually multiple parcel proposals that aren't designated as being on the potential list. So how do you blend a review of a project that involves a potential historic resource? And we have one example right now that we're trying to figure out whether it should go to HLC for one parcel and the other 2 parcels that the ABR. I think you have an opinion on that.
No, I wouldn't want to be on the other side of the table.
Right. So you have this conflict in our regulations. We're hopefully going to resolve that in our new ordinance. But until then, we're just going to remain as is. And if you're on the potential list, the entire property goes to the applicable board.
And I think Mr. Suding had a question.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Mr. Limon, would it be appropriate to have a representative of the Historic Landmarks Commission attend the ABR or Single Family Design Review board meeting to represent the HLC's concerns and ideals, much like they attend
Sure.
Planning Commission or sometimes City Council?
I think it's awkward
Are you volunteering?
because you have one perspective, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I was advocating a courtesy review type of arrangement where at least this commission could have direct comments to the ABR if they were the lead board. And also what I was advocating is we do have a historian. We have guidelines now in place which we think can be implemented. And one of our directions was, or to applicants, was to consult the city historian as part of a submittal process. In other words, she would evaluate the project and advise the ABR on which guidelines were being met and not being met.
It was just a thought, just to keep it. streamlined.
Yeah, no, any ideas like that, we're struggling with that, and so we're going to try to figure out an appropriate method. We also, I think this actually generated, Nicole knows this, from the fact that we have properties that were added as on the potential list just for one element, like a stone wall. And just because you get added because you have a historic stone wall shouldn't subject you to the entirety of the development of the property. So I think that's where we were struggling with, okay, the Historic Landmarks Commission has purview over that historic wall because they've designated or listed that element, but that doesn't give them entirely purview over the entire parcel.
Just the impacts that may have to that stone wall.
Exactly, and we've consulted you when that has happened.
I got you.
Yes.
Mr.
Another
Gilman?
question in there, thank you. So, one question I had was, what about the idea, sorry, I'm on mute. What about the idea of when things come, does it ever happen where things come before us that we don't, or we aren't throwing the historic book at them, so to speak, where or portion of the project is, I mean, it always happens in the sense that anything that's touching the actual historic structure has much more scrutiny,
Right.
or a different level, and in some cases we allow other pieces to just kind of be their own thing, depending on, especially if they're not in EPV. Would it be an idea, at least, to, in a project that has multiple complex purviews, why don't they just come to the one that's the most strict, the HLC, and then we don't apply those HLC rules that are for specific historic structures to the parts that aren't doing it? Has that ever been done? Is that?
I think we've had a purview co-reviews on properties that years past. For example, I could think of the Montecito Country Club, where the portions of the buildings and boundaries, this commission actually set boundaries of the historic portion of the property, and the commission reviewed those buildings, and anything beyond that was the ABR's purview. So there are times when you can develop these boundaries and say this is what's sensitive, and this is what belongs purview to your commission. And this is why I've asked Nicole to always focus on boundaries when you designate, and it'll be more important now as we go forward to have you identify that you want the entire property designated, and therefore you would gain purview over any future buildings on the property. And so I think it's a reflection of how big the property is and whether those buildings will be in close proximity where you would make that judgment.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah,
Make
no,
a
go
comment.
ahead.
It seems to me like we need to develop findings, some new findings for property. I'm thinking of the Plunkett House that was rebuilt, and then there were 3 other houses associated with that in that property. And the property itself wasn't the property wasn't designated; just the Plunkett House
Right.
was designated. I think we should have findings that if we're going to designate the whole property, there has to be a reason that we're doing that.
Sure.
And I don't think we have the appropriate findings right now to accomplish that.
Well, when you do adopt a resolution, that serves as a point of establishing the criteria under which the property is significant, and you could ask the historian to make those statements of fact as part of that resolution. Whereas this is the following fact regarding this property, and this is the need to acquire purview over it. So I think there's a basis to incorporate it in your adopting resolutions. So if you'd like to do that, we'll focus on that when they come to you.
Yeah, actually, the current use of the Secretary of the Interior standards includes setting in a broader scope than has been used in years past. And it keeps on getting broader and broader and more inclusive of what setting means.
And it's consistent with our general plan update,
Yes.
where we talked about protection of resources and proximity to those resources. So there is some supporting basis for it, but we're trying to be fair also. The applicants deserve a good explanation as to why they're being forwarded to the HLC when a majority of their property is not within their review. You sort of say you've got a project, you get the whole thing reviewed, you get part of the thing, part of the project reviewed. That's what we're going to define more clearly.
I think a whole property review is better than a partial property review.
Right.
Actually, on our agenda today, the letter from Nicole on item 6. If we were to receive a similar sort of analysis to projects that get sent to ABR, to just notify us that they have been
Okay.
evaluated and
Sure.
reviewed, and it is a minor historic resource,
Yeah.
and it has been addressed, would allay some fears or
Sure,
negative comments.
we
from
could
the
definitely
community.
have you be copied on those
Yeah.
transmissions.
That would be helpful.
Good.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Sitting.
Mr. Lamone, it seems to me that probably what you suggested, a courtesy review by HLC, is the best thing to do, even though it's a little bit onerous on the applicant. But we're protecting a historic resource, and that's our job. So a courtesy review seems like the way.
Sure, and it actually can further strengthen the position of our urban historian when she recommends guidelines and the ABR has some resistance. We have the commission to support her approach on how to protect the resource.
So
Well, I
That's
did
my
want
vote.
to end the discussion too shortly, but the report, we do have next steps. We do intend to get back and show you the revised version that incorporates these changes after we return back from the planning commission, who also has a discussion proposed in February. So you'll be seeing that version. You'll have an opportunity to look at it.
Great.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Jory.
maybe this is the last word. It shouldn't go unnoticed that all the work that committees for ABR and you okay?
sorry.
Landmarks
Covered it.
Commission did. It wouldn't have really borne fruit unless the work by Jaime Limon and other staff members. We felt that the language, sort of the melding of the various boards and commissions' opinions were very successful. I think Commissioner Mahan and Grumbine would echo my sentiments that it wouldn't have been as successful without the work of staff.
Thank you, and you did push
you
us a
for your
little
work.
bit, so we thank you for that.
Good. I like to hear that. And thank you for your contribution, staff, or not staff, commissioners. Are you done? Our next item is a discussion item number 1, story polls as a design review tool. Staff? Are you doing this?
Yes.
Mr. Malone?
Story polls.
Mr. Chair, I've been asked to follow up on the previous discussion that was led by Renee Brooke, our city planner. Unfortunately, she had a conflict today, and she's asked me to come back and follow up on your direction. What we have today is a summary of the points that you made with respect to story polls for AUD projects, and that was held January 11th, last meeting. At that meeting, we reviewed the current visual aid requirements and give you some background on what we do currently. And what I also have included, speaking of trying to combined efforts, we had a similar discussion with the ABR, and they had specific projects that they felt merited story polls. And so today, I'd like to walk you through and summarize both boards' opinions and see if you can either agree that your current proposed recommendations should stand, or you might want to consider what the ABR came up with. I think there's some valid things that they've raised. So I'd like to walk you through that.
Okay.
If I may. So the criteria that you outlined last meeting was you essentially created the first statement that said story polls may be requested at the discretion of the commission. That is current status quo. But furthermore, you asked that specific types of projects may be a requirement for a trigger. And you noted projects that affect public views of the mountains or ocean, and the ABR had similar concerns. You indicated any project that seems out of scale within El Pueblo Viejo, and any project within 100 feet of a designated historic resource. And finally, when the commission is having difficulty making compatibility findings. And I think that was directly related to the timing and when you felt it would be appropriate to place the story poles up. If you're still asking for changes and whether or not there's some debate about whether the project is appropriate, it might be based on your vote, your straw votes, that would be the time to ask for the story poles so they don't go up too early in the process. So you contrast that versus what the ABR came up with, which is they actually said it might make sense when 4-story projects are proposed. Now, these recommendations are going to go to council, and as you know, 4-story buildings may be more expensive to erect story poles, but that's going to be the discussion that's held by council. They're going to listen to both boards, commissions, and see if there is a balance there about when it would be appropriate to add them to projects. They also indicated a specific requirement for projects that were 30 feet and higher or 3 stories in R3 and R4 locations. So that's kind of an interesting point where they actually picked they asked us to try to identify buildings that might be a point where 3 stories occur. And they pointed out that that was more of a concern in residential neighborhoods, R3 and R4, where you have 3 stories that are typically 1 and 2 stories, and that might be a good point to require them there. I think they've experienced appeal as a result of an AUD project that was 3 stories, and so that's why I think they're recommending that. And then the idea that if you don't have a building within 300 feet, that might be an indicator that this is the first on the block, and that might be more important to identify that there's something that's going to be a little bit taller. And as you know, I had pointed out that some of this has to do with noticing of the neighbors and having them stand out there and view these story poles so they can have a good idea that that is in fact being proposed in their neighborhood. And then the other two, I think this is a valid one. Projects that require planning commission comments pursuant to our section right now. We do refer projects for comments based on the size of the parcel. And so they're saying if they're going to the planning commission, maybe we should just go ahead and require the story poles at design review and have the planning commission go out and look at them as you refer a project or when the project's ready to be referred to the planning commission. And then this is the last one is pretty consistent with what you were saying, which is any instances where the installation of the story poles would exceed the surrounding heights due to the project's potential to substantially exceed the height of surrounding buildings or block or reduce important views. So that's their catch-all. If they feel it's not an appropriate height for that neighborhood and it's exceeding specific buildings or on the block, they would like to have that ability to still require it. And I think it's consistent with their approach now, where they feel. So what I pointed out is really what this commission should consider is whether there should be, that you agree that there should be something in the R3 and R4 neighborhood, and if that's the case, would it be similarly worded like here? I think that's a pretty good cutoff. And whether you would like to have agree and confirm that PC projects would also require the story poles. And I guess support the 4-story rule. Mm-hmm. I don't think you cited 4 stories as a trigger, but maybe you would like to discuss that, whether you do support that approach.
Okay, thank you. I have a request to speaker for a public speaker slip. Mr. DeForest, I'll open public comment.
Thank you. I just wanted to reiterate that besides the body, besides being valuable to the approval bodies such as HLC, story poles are really the best way of alerting the public to the impact of a project. Sorry, it'll go off.
Thank you.
And so I think the more story poles recommendations as possible is the best, because the public rarely is aware of a project, especially if, even if they're noticed, they sometimes don't pay much attention to the email or especially mail notices. So I would recommend that story posts should be mandatory for certain projects, especially the 4-story project in all districts, all zoning districts beyond the residential ones. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeForest. Would everyone in the room please silence their phones?
Phones.
Phones. To the commission, closing public comment. Mr. Suding.
Mr. Chair, I have a question. Mr. Lamone, would you suggested timing as to when the story poles would be erected? That's not addressed in the PowerPoint presentation. Is that something that would be inserted in there as part of, not necessarily the criteria, but maybe
Right.
as a subsection of criteria or something?
Right. We had some internal discussions ourselves because, as you know, the Planning Commission requires story poles on some of their projects. And we definitely do not want them erected twice.
No.
Right? So the question becomes, if your board or your commission wants story poles, when would be the appropriate time? Our feeling was it's really your discretion, but obviously you want to do it before you send a project to the Planning Commission or before you consider the compatibility criteria. If you're there trying to say it's appropriate, I think you all agree it's appropriate. I think you've come to the conclusion you don't need the story poles. If there's some debate about it, I think that would be the time where how close is the project to it being something that's the only issue. Is it the height or the massing? And can you get to an answer more readily if you have the story poles erected? So we would be asking the commission, would you like the story poles to be erected for your next meeting?
Okay.
And
So
you
we
would
need
make a
to do
decision.
more work on the timing language.
I think so. I think you could offer an opinion now. I mean, I think we asked the question, and I think the ABR was deferring to staff about when we would notice them for the item. That we're going to ask the board and commission, are stories required? And if there is a requirement, then we'll be asking at concept reviews, are you ready for the story poles yet? And you would make a judgment as to how close you are to a design thing.
I guess after the rest of the questions from the commission, I might have some comments on timing.
Okay.
So I'm finished with my
That
questions.
wasn't a comment?
Pardon?
That wasn't a comment?
There was, that last part was, yes.
Mr. Grunbein?
Yes. So one question I had, well, the main question I had here was the AUD versus just general infill. So this is all language that's AUD specific.
Yes.
Can we just make it infill, general infill? I mean, it's not for most of the things that we're talking about, we care about the mass, bulk, scale, details, all those things. That's totally separate from whether it's AUD or not. So if all these triggers that we're defining are size and everything else specific, then why not just have it as our infill things and not just AUD? Because
Well, the whole discussion was generated by the AUD. So it wasn't council's direction to consider it for all projects. I think there's a response to the community that there's some concern about these projects and that we're trying to respond to the ability to share with the community where these projects are being proposed. The 300-foot radius apparently isn't adequate. So I think there's a combination of that. And one of the first questions we asked was, do you need story poles? And I think the majority of the time our board members or commissioners do not. I mean, we're actually proceeding with additional technical submittal requirements to give you more perspectives on how to evaluate at all angles the size, bulk, and scale of projects and the compatibility with adjacent buildings. So therefore, if there is a compromise, I think we're trying to set something that seems reasonable rather than totally open it up and say all projects. If you build next to the Granada Theater, do you need to have story poles? Yeah, I think there's okay, you do. well, I guess I'll just listen to see if everyone supports that approach. You could get everyone here to say we want them for every building in EPV, but I don't know if that's going to be supported by staff or council.
Okay.
Other questions or comments?
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Drury?
I was looking at the HLC criteria for story poles, and this is just minor perhaps. But on number 2, any project that seems out of scale, seems to be a pretty weak word. I was wondering would be better. We can make a determination that it's out of scale. I don't know.
Well, I think that if I could respond, I think the question is in doubt. That's why you're asking for story poles.
Okay.
And hopefully that would erase all doubts.
Okay.
What about
So that's why
what about the word appears?
That would be another possibility. Yes, sure, certainly. If you feel more
Appears,
comfortable.
I
with
like
that,
appears.
okay, fine.
Got more letters.
Chair?
Mr. Sudi?
Did you say we were in comments?
Yes,
Okay.
Questions?
Mr. Lamone, I like the way that you've structured the HLC criteria for story poles. I think that is consistent with what we discussed 2 weeks ago. I am a little hesitant. I do respect ABR's criteria for the story poles, but I'm a little bit hesitant on cornering us into those projects that are 30 feet or more in height, or that whole criteria list. I think that our criteria, as you've worded it, has a little bit more leeway, and therefore affords us more opportunities to not require or to require, which I think is a good thing. However, I do have a couple of word smithing on the first bullet point. Story poles may be requested at the discretion of the commission for any projects. Items that could trigger such a request include 1, 2, rather than would typically, because if we're doing this as a sort of question kind of thing, could is better than would typically. And then on number 3, any project within 150 feet of a designated historic structure, and or when the commission, it's not just one of those things, it could be all of those things. So it should be, I think, and or when the commission is receiving or is having difficulty. And then, of course, the timing. And I personally don't have my head wrapped around that all the way. I would like to hear what the other commissioners have to say, but I think it's maybe best left up to staff to help us make that determination on when to time them. I'm done, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Sudi. Mr. Mahan, any comments?
No, I agree with what's been said. I was thinking, in lieu of story poles, what if a new building is very similar in size to an existing building? Supposing somebody is proposing a building, and they say, the height, the footprint of this building is very, very similar to the Coffee Cat building on the corner of Anapamu and Anacapa Street. It's very similar. Why don't you guys go take a look at that and see if you think it's okay, instead of story poles. If they could find an example of a building that is very similar, why wouldn't that be a good substitute?
Context.
What?
Context.
Well, that could be part of their presentation to us.
It could be.
Yeah.
And an appropriate one, in that we've asked for background information of massing studies and all this other stuff we've been asking for already. My personal take on it, I would be very comfortable adding ABR's criteria to ours. it's.
1,
it's-
2, and 3 anyway.
And all of this is at our discretion, so that doesn't mean that every 32-foot building is going to come in front of, is going to require story poles, right? Am I correct?
No, no, they're actually establishing requirements.
Requirements.
Mandatory requirements.
That's the part I'm uncomfortable with.
Yeah.
For us, it would be at our discretion.
Right.
Because some projects immediately look like they fit in and others immediately don't. And, after we have, the first meeting,
Well,
to take a look at it.
may I ask the residential R34 question? So if a project was proposed and it was a 3-story project, would there ever be a situation where you said, we don't need story poles for a 3-story?
Yeah.
How many, well.
Well, again, the
I'm-
neighbors
I'm
are
I'm-
asking for story poles.
I'm thinking of Santa Barbara. Most residential areas are 2 stories tall.
1 and 2 stories, yes.
1 and 2 stories tall. So a 3-story building is sort of like the thing that's going to stick up. So
Right.
I'm sort of comfortable with that.
Well, that's what I'm suggesting, that if you don't specify, under this situation, we want story poles, it isn't very clear for an applicant to know that there's an expectation that it would be required.
Mr.
you follow?
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, I think I do.
Yeah.
So the ABR is coming with these as,
Yeah, because they
Requirements.
dealt with an appeal already with a 3-story project that was primarily 1 and 2-story.
yeah.
And
I
it caused
I
a lot
know
of
the one.
conflict about whether it was appropriate, even though the zoning allowed 45 feet in that R4 zone. So there was still this concern about, well, these are typically single-family homes or 1 or 2-story apartment buildings, and now you're going 3-story. Is that appropriate? So they're responding by saying, well, if they're that controversial, then these AUD projects that are 3 stories, we're going to require story poles. And they're using the 30-foot or the 3-story as the trigger.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Grunbein.
So, I mean, and my feeling on it is that if ABR is doing this, I mean, we can at least do as good hard as that.
Oh, now.
I think for the sake of the applicants, we should be consistent.
Well, I mean, it's okay to disagree, and we would present that to council, that the commission doesn't feel it's necessary. But
I, for one, would agree with ABR that it is a
Okay.
criteria. Now, how many people agree with me? Raise your hand.
Well, Mr. Chair?
Well, can you raise your hand, and then we'll have discussion.
Just on that specific
was it
one.
again?
We'll talk
That's
about
on that,
one,
on
on that trigger.
That we accept the ABR's recommendation as criteria.
Yeah, yes.
But not mandatory.
Well,
No, it is
Criteria would be
that makes it
mandatory.
mandatory.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, can I have a show of hands? 1, 2, 3, 4. Count 5.
So that is included.
Yes.
And then you would agree that the planning commission comment trigger,
Yes.
yeah, that one. And then their last one about exceeding the height of surrounding buildings, I think that's consistent with what you're saying, which is it's out of character scale with the
Yeah,
neighborhood.
number 1 and number 4.
Okay, no, the 4 stories. Let's talk about that one. So they also have a requirement for 4-story projects. So
Oh, yeah.
this is where I was coming from, where let's just say you're in EPV and you have 3 and 4-story buildings on that block. Would you require story poles even if they can make a case that there are already buildings of that height or exceeding the height? It's already been said. Yes, yes. I could see where there's no buildings in that neighborhood. And this is that issue of where you're getting that creep of taller buildings. But let's say they're plopping it in between 2 3-story buildings. Do you really need story poles to tell them the height? A 4-story?
Only if it's inconsistent with adjoining development.
Okay, so you are putting a qualifier on it. They had no qualifiers. They're responding to any 4-story.
Yeah, I mean, and again, it's if we're having difficulty making compatibility criteria.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Drury?
That's number 4 on our criteria.
Right.
Yeah.
And I would also
It's
add,
already-
when
all that is already there.
when the commission is having difficulty making neighborhood compatibility
But it's
findings.
selective. It's not specifying.
Yes.
For example, if I propose a 4-story building, I know coming into this hearing that I'm going to be expected to place story poles under ABR's criteria.
I don't agree with that.
Not for HLC yet. So I'm trying to
Not for
understand.
HLC, yeah.
Okay,
That's
right?
Yes.
Okay.
We reserve
Yes,
the
you've
right
always
to-
had that right. But the
Reserve that right.
council's asking,
Okay, then we
Okay.
would waive number 4.
okay,
I'm
then you're
here-
not in agreement with ABR
We're
then.
not agreeing just on number 4
Okay.
for
Yes.
EPV.
And
Right.
I'm going to add one quick little note to that. I think that's also consistent with the fact that EPV should be historically the most dense and tallest aspect of Santa Barbara, and
Right.
that goes with our historic map of Santa Barbara, where State Street is actually the most dense and the tallest compared to everywhere else. So
60 feet, Mr. Mahan, 60 feet.
Except Outer State Street, and is pretty soon is going to.
But
Downtown.
sort of the core of our purview is
downtown's
actually
moving
should be
upstate.
more dense than
Well,
the rest of the
that's another-
city. If we're
I mean, you could also support ABR's approach, that you would like them to have story poles for those buildings that are occurring on Outer State and Mission and
Oh,
Haley and-
I'm not disagreeing
Right.
with ABR's
Okay.
findings
No.
for their area.
Yes.
auto trigger.
Right,
You know, back when we were arguing about Measure B,
discussing.
discussing it, there was this, and we were focusing on Chapala Street because that's where it was starting, and the concept came up of canyonization of Chapala Street. Canyonization, because, you know,
I remember that
what you get a
word.
4-story building here, and then the next building can be compatible to the 4-story building, and so on and so on. And I was just looking at these pictures here, and the ones that are really the most interesting to me are the ones where the buildings have a lot of variety in height, rather than where they're all. I think the one at the lower right there is more. You'd say all of those buildings are compatible with one another, whereas above they're not necessarily compatible, but there's variety. I think that we may be getting ourselves into a corner with the word compatibility, because there are other things in architecture and design besides compatibility. There's variety and
Innovation.
so compatibility isn't, you know, if we're just going to be compatible, eventually everything is going to be, Santa Barbara's going to end up all 4 stories or all 3 stories, because that's the way it'll go, and it'll be compatible.
But not uniformity. We're not saying
So
uniformity.
how do we word this into when we want storage?
Well, I think that when we use the word compatible,
That's
and
a
that's the only
wishy word.
criteria, that's the only criteria. If it's compatible, then it's okay. I'm suggesting that maybe it's not necessarily compatible because it's the same height. It may be compatible because it provides variety to the streetscape, and that makes it it's compatible with greater Santa Barbara, with bigger Santa Barbara, rather than just with the neighboring buildings.
I think those are the compatibility findings that we have to make. And and the criteria doesn't say specifically compatible. It says that if the commission is having difficulty making those compatibility findings, so the
But what I'm trying to suggest is that we want to be sure that we're not talking about compatibility with the adjacent building. We're talking about compatibility with El Pueblo Viejo.
And I think that's covered.
The findings.
Look at criteria 3,
And 2.
which I'm reading. You know, appropriate to its location and its
Tell him it's
neighborhood.
on there.
On a scale, okay, that's.
Up there.
Yeah, and it's here, right here, too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's what, we need to focus, we need to really focus on that very strongly.
Yes, and that's there already, and we want that there.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Drury?
And doesn't everything sort of get under the umbrella of the opening bullet point to our criteria? I mean, that covers it.
Yes.
And we're sort of just making sure that the language
We're
underneath that bullet
just-
point,
We're providing fair warning,
right.
Yeah. So, Mr. Chair,
which applicants like. Mr. Suding?
with all due respect to your straw vote, it seems to me that, as Mr. Drury just said, that all of that is covered really under that first bullet point, and we don't necessarily need the ABR criteria for story poles, 2 and 3.
The difference is ours are at our discretion, ABRs are requirements.
Right, and so it's already covered if it's at our discretion, if it's...
No, I'd much rather have it clearer. As the applicant knows, they're coming in with this tall building, story poles will be required at some point in our discussion.
Okay.
Not necessarily the first
I'm
meeting.
not comfortable
May
with
be
saying that,
required
but that's-
at the discretion of, right?
No. The
Are
idea,
required.
the idea is that they are required, and they will be required at some point in the review process. And so,
Okay.
When in
I-
the
I-
review process is our
yeah,
discretion.
we can continue without any discussion and go to council and say the commissions and boards can require it at their discretion. That's not what they wanted. They wanted specific projects, AUD projects that you recommend should be no.
If that's what they have to have, then that's fine.
I think it's fair. So I still have 4 in support?
I think you had 5.
I had 5, but I think I lost you.
I wasn't counted as supporting.
Yes, I was. Didn't I count you?
I think it's
No,
unanimous.
okay. Mr. Sitting dissents. Do you have enough information, Mr. Lamont?
We do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Our first item on our regular agenda, 20 minutes late, is 1300 block of East Yananali Street. I don't understand the rest of it, but okay. Your name, please?
Afternoon, my name is Andrew Grubb. I'm with the City Public Works Department.
Welcome.
Mr. Chair, are we reviewing just the historic structures report and not the project?
This is an historic structures report, sorry.
No.
So I don't know why we have the plans necessarily in front of us.
This was a requirement of the structures report that you accepted in a year ago, was it? December 2015, that a conservation plan
I
be
do.
developed.
I gotcha. Thank
And
you.
this is the conservation plan in plan form.
Okay,
So,
gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah, so,
Okay.
yeah, it's
I
different.
understand.
I
got
have
it.
a copy of
I
the
got it.
original report, if you need it. Yeah, which you've already seen and accepted. So this is just the details of the conservation plan that was required to salvage the stone.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have any other presentation?
That's it.
Had Mr. Suding given you a chance to speak? Mr. Grubb, what's your project?
So as Nicole stated, we're here to present the physical conservation program. So this is going to outline how we preserve and reuse that sandstone for the Montecito Yananali Street Bridge. So we've outlined here, flip to page 2. This is, being a public works project, what we're proposing is bidding this project out for the summer and then actually approving who they're going to use as the sub for we're calling it a masonry expert. So once we approve that masonry expert, Nicole will actually work with them in the field to supervise that work. And so we have different outlines here for how that person is going to be selected by the prime consultant, prime contractor. So once work begins, they're going to submit a more detailed plan that would give specifics on how they're going to dismantle the sandstone and then reuse that on site. So, yeah, I think when we last presented this project, we presented you guys with the courtesy review, and we took those comments to ABR and incorporated those. So the next sheet here is actually a little more detail on the exposed portion of the sandstone that we'll be reusing there. And then if you flip to the next page, some of those details about, again, using the board form liner for the abutments and then reusing where we're going to reuse the sandstone. This gives a little more detail on sheet 5, just the abutment walls there. Get more abutment wall
Construction details for the
Yep.
new, for the new.
This is on sheet 7 is the stamp we're going to place on the concrete. We've been doing this on a lot of our bridges, and one of our questions actually was if I know Creeks in the past has included the creek name. So if you guys want to make a comment on how that's incorporated, we can add that as well. This will be over
The
Sycamore Creek.
buttresses here, I mean, the columns.
Is bridge number necessary?
We have been including that. That's one of, since it'll become a Caltrans bridge, we'll
Oh,
include
I
that.
see.
Each bridge will have its own number.
Look at these trees, I think. God, sycamores are beautiful.
It would seem that, okay. And pictures.
Yes. These were presented, the
Not the last
concept.
meeting.
Again, we added the pyramids on top of the pilasters as well. And that's another perspective on the last sheet.
Greatly appreciated. Is that your presentation?
Yeah.
Thank you. I have a public comment by email from Paulina Kahn on Foothill Road. She is not in support of the bridge replacement.
No, they just
To summarize. Mr. DeForest, do you have anything to say? No? I'll close public comment to the commission for questions. Are there questions, Mr. Drury?
I do not have questions.
Mr. Mahan?
I have a question. I'm looking at the last page that shows the perspective. And I'm looking at the columns, the 4 columns, and the cap in the top of it. Is that stone or is that concrete?
We can use stone for that.
I believe it was
yeah, we
intended
should
to
have
be
enough.
stone.
It-
It's probably perhaps the rendering texture
Mhm.
that shows it
It would
as.
appear to be one big piece of stone, and I don't think you get that off of that. You know, when you take the stone off of the existing culvert, you won't get a piece of stone that big. There need to be some joints in there or something needs to be considered. Well, I'm getting into comments. Okay, you answered my question. It's going to be stone. The pyramid will be stone.
Solid sandstone blocks,
Okay.
but it does need articulation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mr. Suding?
You know,
Mr. Chair, thank you.
yes, it needs to be thicker.
Is any of the stone going to be tooled, or maybe a better word would be sliced or cut, or are you actually going to use the full block?
We will be cutting these as a veneer, so
So a
leaving
4-inch or something, okay?
8-inch cut.
Okay.
the 8
I
inches.
didn't see it, so, okay, thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Vania?
Is that the design that previously existed this time?
No.
No?
This is what we approved about a year ago.
Thank you.
Mr. Grumbine?
Yes, just about the arch, was that splay at the bottom of the arch on page 3 of 9? Was that splay already approved in terms of this flare out? The spring point, or
Yes.
was as display? Okay.
Yeah, it was. Any other comments?
Comments? Yes, I have
And
a
comments
comment.
now?
Well, we can, yes.
Mr.
Mr. Suding, if you're ready.
Yeah. Just want to make sure that the stone, as it wraps a corner, is expressed as a full dimensional stone. And that full dimensional stone would be anywhere from 9 to 12 inches thick. Because you're going to veneer it, you have to make sure that you cut corner pieces that specifically express a full stone. That's all, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Mr. Mahan?
Yeah, I'm looking at page 4 of 9, and focusing on this column, which does show joints in the capstone. I wonder if it wouldn't be nice if the cap was a little proud of the rest of the column, a half inch. You don't think so?
No, I think it looks more appropriate if it's not expressing that reveal.
Was it, is that part still up for push and pull?
Yeah. You
this-
could,
is
well, yeah, you're welcome to an opinion.
It wasn't on,
Mr.
it wasn't on
Mr.
the, on the
Mr.
in
Grumbine?
December last year, or 2 years ago. I did watch the video.
You were here.
This is what I was yelling at the computer.
Okay, who was present, who was absent?
That's right. No names. Okay, I just want to clarify that. So, along that vein, I do think that whether it overlaps or not, I think both are sort of acceptable designs. But definitely the thinness of it reads like it's like a thin plate on top right now, and especially, yeah, it seems like that needs to grow and become substantial. Whether or not it overlaps. I think it definitely needs to get thicker.
Thicker, then I don't think it would have to overlap, but it's thin, and so it feels more like a cap.
So that vertical plane needs to have some dimension.
Yeah.
And it looks like it's actually drawn 2 different ways. On detail 1 versus the elevations, it looks like detail 1 of sheet 4 of 9. That actually looks like a decent thickness on the cap there, and it's probably just the hatching of the drawing, but the height of that looks good. But then you look at the elevation and to the left of it, and
Okay, I think I know how to say this. Okay, Mr. Vania.
No, I was comparing with him. The top, of course, was rather thin, and whether it's going to be plastered or not, I don't know. Anyway, no comments.
Okay. Those were comments? Any comment about the stream name?
of the which?
Stream name being included?
That would be nice, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Sitting.
That would be nice, but I'll leave it up to the discretion of the Creeks Division.
Okay. To summarize the comments.
I haven't made my comments, Mr. Chair.
Oh, Mr. Drury, I'm sorry.
I'm just hiding down here.
I know you are.
I think it's commendable, and I really like seeing this type of illustration of the project. For me, much more than plans. And if it ends up looking like page 9 of 9, I'd be very pleased. I go by there every day, twice, and it's not a dangerous intersection only because people are very cautious. But when I see ladies pushing their strollers with babies up to the 5 points, it's pretty fraught. So, thank you.
To summarize the comments, we greatly appreciate the graphic representations in rendering form. There seems to be a consensus that the pyramidal cap should appear to be integral to the top course of stone. So the joints should wrap into the cap so that it appears to be carved out of one piece of stone. The other comment was to fabricate the corner pieces so that they appear to be at least 12 inches thick. And this can be done with a careful joining of 2 pieces of veneer or a solid block that was cut as a corner piece. And we think that the stream name should be included in the bridge title. Did I miss anything?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Suding.
I would like to clarify my comment regarding the veneer corners. The veneer corners should be a one solid block cut out in an L shape.
They weren't at the Santa Barbara Inn, Mr. Suding.
That's a different situation.
They were
Mr.
glued.
Lavoie.
They were glued together. This is going to be
Mr.
taken.
Lavoie?
This is going to be taken off as a veneer, Mr. Suding. Does anyone else agree with Mr. Suding?
I do in general agree with that approach. I don't, yeah, I think that that turning a corner with an L is preferable. It'll make it look like it's, yeah, it'll make it look like it's more built out of the real stuff. But I think it's also more difficult because you're trying to find a big chunk. So if you can, I think there's only so much sandstone you got to work with now. So if you can get those corners right.
Let me go back to a question then. The sandstone on the bridge right now is merely a veneer, is it not? It's not solid, or is it solid? How thick is it?
I think the record drawing actually said rubble, so we're not exactly sure what we're going to get once we start dismantling this, but
Maybe turn into pieces.
yeah, some of it could.
Could we have it if possible?
So if possible,
Mhm.
the corner blocks are to be fabricated from a solid block of at least 12 inches thick. If not, so fabricated
Push and pull.
with
Push
an
and pull.
invisible joint. Okay, I think that will,
That's fine with me.
good. Can I have a motion for final approval of this project?
Motion made.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? The motion carries. Thank you so much.
Hope you have enough stone.
The next item is item number 3, 232 East Olivos Street. This is an archaeological report prepared by Dudek.
Yes.
You don't look like David.
No.
If only David looked back at, no, just kidding. No, you can tell me. You can take it.
You would know. If you'd introduce yourself, please,
Yes,
for the
my
record.
name is Heather Mc...
There you go.
Okay. My name is Heather McDaniel, and I'm the co-author on it. So I prepared it.
Do we have a report from staff?
No, from Dr. Glashow.
I'm sorry. I have the report, thank you. Do we have any comments from
I
staff?
was going to make a comment about that.
Let me
Didn't
be
you
more
go?
clear.
Apologize, Mr.
No-
Chair.
No problem.
Dr. Glassow reviewed the report and concluded that the archaeological investigation supports the report's conclusions and recommendations that as the proposed project would not have the potential to result in significant impacts on either prehistoric or historic archaeological resources, no mitigation measures are required. The standard condition regarding the discovery of unanticipated archaeological resources will apply and shall be printed on the plans prior to issuance of a building permit.
Thank you. Any any public comment? Seeing none, close public comment. Any questions from the commission?
No.
Comments?
Very nice report. Well done.
Yes.
Thank you.
I would agree, and I followed the logic, had to read it 3 times. But thank you for going through that exercise of why something that appears to be very important is perhaps outside the boundary of being important. So I would entertain a motion for acceptance of the report with, well, no comments, or with Dr. Glasshouse comments.
So moved.
So, Suding,
Drury moved first.
Drury
But he
made
moved
the
quietest.
motion, seconded by Suding.
Yes.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Motion carries.
Thank you, ladies and
Thank you.
gentlemen.
Although this one has coffee spills all over it.
What's that? I just
Part of the system.
dispose of them, unless if you want to have them, you can certainly keep it. Okay.
I read it twice.
Sorry about the
Item number
coughing.
4 is 232 East Olivos Street.
Oop.
Sorry. Eckenberger. Oh, great. Thank you.
May I look over your shoulder?
Yeah,
Thank you.
the building there.
Oops. Much better.
I think that's.
What's the difference?
The historic plans appear that there's supposed to be a building back there. Am I reading that right?
I think that's the second floor elevation.
Oh, I see.
That's
It took me
It
a
is the
minute.
second floor.
Took me a minute, Mr. Chair,
It's the
also.
second floor, that's from the Pat Gebhardt's book. Yeah.
So,
I couldn't figure out at first either.
so the garden is really only suggested.
Right.
Correct, we found no traces of a garden plan beyond the terrace.
Thank you. Any other?
I have a full stack of drawings for you guys.
Oh, you mean we
Just
can
one.
keep these?
Yeah, I would like to keep them in the landmark file, but I took pictures of all of the drawings that were there.
The owner's getting copies, we can hand them out.
Oh, good.
No, I think well,
If you wanted, if the commission wanted to see any more, they were
I'm
beautiful.
good with what we saw.
I think
Anyone
this
else
goes
want to
back
see
to-
this?
And we saw them the last time, right?
No,
No,
we
these
didn't
are-
actually.
Oh, I thought this was.
Yeah, we didn't see this.
Thank
We
you.
saw the
That, by the
photographs.
way, is the second floor plan.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Okay. Flip.
Derek Eichelberger with Arcadia Studio, returning to you after doing a little bit more historical research, taking your comments about the center part of the garden to heart. We had a fun field trip to the gallery where all of the archives are kept. Nicole went with me and the owners went with me, and it's just
Fascinating.
It's always, it gives you tingles whenever you see somebody like,
Original drawings.
yeah, hand drawn, you're just like, oh. So anyway, that's
I
really.
hope you didn't do this.
No, I didn't. Surprised they don't make you wear gloves, but.
I am too.
It was interesting to me, if you have one of the plans that shows the courtyard, either of them, there was no real indication of a
Like this one?
a garden theme, but what was interesting is the other plan shows it even better. The existing design of the terrace was only this wide, and you'd step down 2 different directions into the garden. So the doors that are there exit onto the brick terrace, but you can see how thin it was in the old day. This is where the addition was added much later. But so you would come out onto this terrace, and there must have been a really nice garden that you would step down to this way, and it would go down into this main area as well, which is kind of fun to think about. The owner had this photo, which was, I think, from the 40s, as near as I can tell. You can see the house also
Could you zoom in, please?
You can see the house also pre-addition, and you get the sense of that open garden space to the side, as well as the huge garden to the back. And I never did find that photo that you and I were talking about. We went over to the Glen Hill Library also and couldn't dig it up, but I did find these 2 photos in addition. This is that central spine, which is still there, and you can still see the aging of the brick, which is much like it is today. It's interesting that they had the Italian cypress there with a little sundial instead of the fountain that's there now. And then this is an oblique angle of what looks to be part of that runnel. I think you can see a little bit of the brick going down, similar to the way it is now. And this is that steel plate that is in the fountain wall.
So it's been there a while.
Yeah, this element's not on top anymore.
What era are these?
That a little, that was a
These,
vase.
we think that these were from the the late 30s.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Very nice.
So as far as the garden design went, we eliminated all of the interior. We're just going to leave it as is for right now. There's a lawn there, which we know we'll have to not irrigate, at least until, well, we'll be good until spring. And the pool's as it was previously designed. We also added a sheet for the Tier 2. We're proposing to do this area, this area, this area, and this area as a depressed basin, down about 6 inches to collect water. We're proposing to cut joints through our new brick terrace so that water will be able to go directly from the lawn into this basin. We also did a 24-hour examination per the standard guidelines to see if we get percolation. It did percolate even with all of our recent rain. We still were able to evacuate the hole within a 24-hour period. This we're going to do as a little rain garden. So we'll do, you know, there's already some iris in there. Maybe we'll change the species so it becomes more of a feature. So that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a request, I'm going to open public comment. I have a request to speak from Kellum DeForest. Kellum?
So, Mr. Eckelberger, did you find any indication that the olive trees were there? I can't see. Because the Bill Toronto indicated that they were
Actually,
there
if
when
you
they
please
purchased the
show it on-
property.
I'm sorry. Never mind. Let me
No, go ahead, please show it to him.
Okay, sorry.
Public's already seen it.
That I found in the Glen Hill Library. These are all olives back here. And then you can see there was a big one right here as well. And one last photo. Helen.
Yeah, I thought
You can see the density of the planting in the backyard.
right, you know, with those olive trees.
Right. What?
Bill Toronto, the previous owner, thought those olive trees might date back as they did on the property next door on Garden Street to the Mission Olive Orchard. And so I was wondering, were you considering olive trees in that open space? Thank you.
There's still no.
Thank you. I'll close public comment.
All right, thanks.
Any questions from the commission?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Suding?
Mr. Eckelberger, what type of lawn are you proposing?
Just keeping what's there, which is kind of a mix. It was Marathon 2 when we planted it in 2007. Now it's a little bit of everything.
You planning on irrigating it then? And if so, how? I know.
No, we'll probably just let it turn brown in the summer and water it again in the, you know.
The natural rainfall, okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, I'm done.
Any other questions?
Okay.
Yeah. I have a question. And while the olive trees don't look old enough to me, at least in the photographs, to have dated from the Mission period, they look like maybe not too old. Have you included olive trees in your mix of plant palette?
We could certainly make these new olive trees. See what we did here? Yeah, new specimen olive trees.
Perfect.
And there are two substantial ones. One is over here, and this one right here. It's struggling a little bit, but I think this is obviously one of the mission olives.
One of the older olive trees, good. And have you considered reusing the cypress trees as they were used in the historic photo?
I just discovered this 2 days ago, and I haven't shown this to the owners yet, but I would consider it if they would be.
They could be there.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Yeah, I would make that suggestion.
Okay.
Any comments then?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Suding.
I think this is ready for project design approval with the following comment that the applicant should study incorporating cypress, Italian cypress, as seen in the photo or inspired by the photo from the 1930s.
Any other comments?
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Drury.
It struck me just now that more than half of this property is given to garden, which is really amazing, so generous. And I love the fact that you've taken our comments to heart. And the linearity, it makes it more open. It's going to be lovely. Thank you.
More better.
Thanks.
Any other comments?
I like the formality and the direction it's taken and the simplicity in cleaning it up and respecting the architecture and the time period.
All right, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if you do want to give project design approval for this property, you will need to make MPO findings.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, ready to make a motion?
Please go ahead.
Make a motion that for project design approval with the following comment that the applicant study the use of Italian cypress as inspired by the photo from the 1930s, and that the commission appreciates the revised design, specifically the formality and the openness, and that the neighborhood compatibility findings are made. And I'm trying to find those, sorry. Yes?
We have them listed for another project. You can just come over.
I don't know where I put it in my stack.
I don't read them every day, so it's not like
No,
I
she handed it.
just pluck them out there.
Also, Mr. Chair,
Oh, here we go.
did you
Can I
want?
finish my motion? And okay. The commission finds that this project is consistent with required neighborhood preservation ordinance findings as follows. The proposed development is consistent with the scenic character of the city and will enhance the appearance of the neighborhood. The proposed development is compatible with the neighborhood, and its size, bulk, and scale are appropriate to the site and neighborhood. The proposed building and structures doesn't really apply. The proposed project does not include the removal of or significantly impact any designated specimen tree, historic tree, or landmark tree. The proposed project, or excuse me, the public health, safety, and welfare are appropriately protected and preserved. The project generally complies with the good neighborhood guidelines regarding privacy, landscaping, noise, lighting, and that the development, including proposed structures and grading, preserves significant public scenic views of and from the hillside.
Could I have a second?
Second.
Under discussion, staff, you wish to add something?
Yes, you were giving it project design approval. Did you want to see this return again for
Yes.
final approval to the full board or consent?
2 week or indefinite?
Indefinite.
To the consent?
I'd be comfortable with that. 2 week, indefinite continuance to the consent calendar.
Under discussion, would you add to your motion to change the word appreciate to commends?
Sure.
And recommending the use of additional olive trees? And is grateful for the retention of what olive trees survive.
Sure. Those three are fine.
Seconder agreed? Do I have a second?
Yes.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I heard no opposed. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for asking us to go do the research out at the archive.
You're welcome.
Thank you also.
Oh, usually when it's amazing what they learn about. They really realize what they bought.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, could I suggest a break?
No.
Okay.
I'm sorry? Oh, there's a 10-day appeal period on any item with our approval. We're going to take a 10-minute break, please.
clouds in the sky should never make you feel that way. The rain will bring the violets of May. Tears are in vain, so honey, please don't be that way. As long as we see it through, you'll have me, I'll have you, sweetheart. Tomorrow is another day. Don't break my heart, oh honey, please don't be that way. As long as we see it through, you'll have me, I'll have you, sweetheart. Tomorrow is another day. Don't break my heart, oh honey, please don't be that way. Don't be that way. Don't be that way. Honey, 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 please don't be that way.
gazebo. It's porte cochere. Did you hear what he said?
Could be the story, but now he's a young guy who just traveled all over the place. I'm reconvening as soon as I get
The voice back.
okay, I think I don't sound like I'm on. It's on. Okay, I'll reconvene the meeting. We're on item number 5, 2019 Plaza Bonita. This is a two-tier review. We have both a project review and, where's my mute button?
On the top.
No, it's not on.
Maybe you're not
Turn
hooked
it
up
off
here.
and back on.
Oh, yeah, you are.
Turn it off and back on.
Can you hear me now?
Thrifty.
Again.
Save
This is
money.
a two-tier review of both the historic structures report and a project. I'm actually going to start, I think, with questions about, any questions on the historic structures report. Then we might do a review of the design and then go to comments about both. Do I have a staff report?
On the historic structures report, I did review it, and I did agree with the conclusions of the report that it does not have a significant impact on the resource and meets the CEQA guidelines.
Great, thank you very much. Are any questions on the report from the commission?
No, sir.
We can't comment?
Not
Well,
yet.
no, well, eventually, yeah. Are there any comments on the findings, rather than the evaluation of the design? No? Okay, could you present the design and introduce yourself? I'm sorry.
Don Sherry, the architect for the project.
And could the historians introduce themselves, please?
Yes.
Pamela Post of Post Hazeltine Associates, one of the authors of the report.
Tim Hazeltine, Post Hazeltine Associates.
Great, thank you.
Okay, this project is an original Edwards and Plunkett house. Where's photos? You guys know the
Well,
house.
if you have photos.
But we submitted photos, so it might be a good idea to look at those. I'm going to start by pointing out that the original house drawings do not reflect what was originally built in some ways. They're minor.
Hold on 1 second. We have some.
Go ahead.
There are minor differences, but the major one is probably the fact that the garage was not built in line at the angle of the same alignment as the house, which is what the original drawings show. You might have seen the original construction documents. I don't know if you did or not. I don't know if they saw those, but the garage was shown in line here, and then it was obviously never built in line. It was built adjusted to the site at one point. I think that's addressed also in the report.
Yes.
It is addressed.
So, and there are a couple other ways that the house was either not built the way the original drawings show or modified later at some point prior to my clients purchasing the property, which was fairly recent, a year ago. So what my clients, Neil and Lee Myers, are very passionate about the house. They bought the house because they've always wanted it, and when it came available by the DeLarbs, they jumped on the opportunity to purchase it, and since then have been very involved in every detail to bring the house back to the originally intended design, with also some additions. So I'm going to go over some of the, where's the footprint? I'm going to go over some of the alterations. The garage door is going to, there's a photo of it here, is going to be brought back to more traditional garage door that is a replica of the original design that was in the original construction documents. There is a existing window in the dining room that's here, and in order to secure a better connection between the dining room and the courtyard and the backyard, which I'll show you on the landscape plan. Chuck McClure can't be here today to present his landscape plan, but I'll review it with you. We would like to add a double French door, also in keeping with the same style of the original wooden doors. And
You see them?
there's a upper level bathroom remodel that does not affect the interior.
Exterior.
The exterior. There's an existing studio that's permitted on the lower portion of the lot that when they did it, they could have put more attention to historic detailing in it. So what we'd like to do is
Looks like a
kind of help that out a little bit.
Julio?
There's a window that we'd like to replace with, again, a French door. I'll show you on the landscape plan. It's down on the lower level of the lot. The window that's here, we'd just like to shift it because the ocean view is from his desk. This is going to be Neil's studio, his office, is right through here. So we'd like to shift the window if we can. There's an arbor type gardening shed made out of open wood trellising that is right here, and we'd like to replace that with a setback conforming small accessory structure that I'll show you elevations for right now. It's just a simple plaster structure with a clay tile roof.
And this is the French door
Yes.
you're changing. And there are no other changes to the historic building, this building right here, other than the door, right?
No, however, there were some minor things, like I mentioned before, that maybe Tim and Pam can expound on them. There were just a couple of minor differences between what was built and what the original drawing showed.
We're only responsible for what they built, actually.
Okay.
I mean, what was built was built.
Yeah, and so I wanted to just point that out, full disclosure.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
And the courtyard was permitted, but again, it's not the way they want to use it, and it hasn't been fully utilized, and Chuck McClure has a much better solution for how it should be utilized. There is a, what else should I point out? Where is?
So this is the change in the window.
This is the change in the window.
And then this is your new building.
This is the new building. Just picking up on the same detailing of the house. And where's the front elevation of that? This is the back elevation. Oh, no, that's the studio. This is existing. There's that trellis. It's hard to read upside down. So it's just very.
Okay.
We can just go on to that. Chuck's drawing, by the way, shows a different door, but my drawing supersedes his, and it was in evolution when Chuck was doing his landscape plan. I didn't feel he had to redo his entire hand sketch because of my doors changing. So what we'd like to do in the courtyard now is add a fountain. And what else is he doing here? So this whole area is landscaped with some old pavers. And there was kind of a dead, I think it was a tipu or a jacaranda in this area that is coming out. Or it might have been dead and it came out already. This is where the new French doors go from the dining room. And so the idea is there's some small stairs here now, and we just would like to open that up so that there's more of a connection. And this is going to become kind of their outdoor living room. This deck is already here. This is all here. And then there's a drop, as you can see, of 5.5 feet to here, and then to the existing accessory building office. This is then going to drop an additional 2 feet that isn't done yet, but we'd like to drop it so that this new accessory building becomes diminutive and very like just barely visible from the view from the balcony, the existing balcony. The new spa is taking on a very historic character, and all of this hardscape is new, in keeping with the same pattern of the existing Satio tile. And so the biggest change, I think, is these stairs that are flowing down here, and this drop in grade to another little fountain here, the spa. There's a little barbecue hidden behind the new planter configuration here. These are just simple plaster walls, low walls. This is a new enclosure for trash, because the trash right now is located in the interior yard setback and the front setback, which we are relocating and hiding.
Could you show us what that looks like and what this looks like on the elevation, please?
There's no side elevation to show that. This is just a sloping plaster. I don't know. Let's see if we drew that. I think we just drew the elevations of the building, Bill. Oh no, there we go. That's it. We did draw that.
And that's your trash enclosure. Okay.
So he did draw that. And am I forgetting something that Chuck might have wanted me to say? I didn't know he wasn't coming until just now.
Oh.
And
Any new trees, any new significant removals of trees?
look at what he's got going. These are the risers, the new tile risers. This is the edges of his new spa that he wants to do. That's this. So it looks like a fountain, but it's actually a spa.
Okay.
These are the tiles.
Where does the fruitless olive go, do you know?
Probably.
There's no indications where these
Plant symbols?
trees go.
Yeah, those are dealing with the hardscape.
Yeah, there's not plant identification.
These are drought tolerant plantings.
Okay.
So the answer is no.
The answer is no.
Not yet.
Okay.
Do the historians have anything to add?
Actually, just one item is that in our evaluation of the property and the research that we did for this report, as well as the survey that was done about, I hate to say it, about 14 years ago, we couldn't find any indication that the original landscape was the work of a landscape designer or horticulturalist. So that the landscape that's there now is something that just kind of developed over the years as different owners had different needs and different desires as far as the landscaping, but it's not part of a unified plan or something that really represents a particular style. It has an amalgam of elements, including some plastered areas for retaining walls, some rock work, a little bit of, I think, a wrought iron railing. There's a few different types of paving materials, and this all just indicates that sort of additive nature of the design. And that's one of the reasons that we approve, one of the reasons that we approved these changes is that they're broadly in the scope of what you would find and they're sympathetic overall with the Spanish colonial revival style. They're set to the back of the property, so they're not terribly visible from the street and not removing historic landscape elements that might contribute to the significance of the property. That's it.
Thank you.
That's all.
I'll open public comment. I have a speaker slip from Kellum DeForest. Kellum?
I don't see any reference to my father, Lockwood DeForest, as possible as landscaping. I know he did work for Mrs. Andrews, and I would have to, and I gather those plans have not been checked, so I'll have to double check and see whether some of the original landscaping could have been like Lockwood DeForest Jr.'s work. I think because of the importance of the structure historically, and that I would like to hear comment on the Plaza Bonita Historic District plan, what that includes and how that would impact on the district. Thank you.
Thank you, Kellum. Actually, that was covered, the history was covered in the report, actually quite extensively. And the historians just stated that they were unable to unearth any connection or historic documents or drawings for this particular garden. They have done that research. Thank you for your comments. I'll close public comment to the commission for questions. Questions, Anthony?
So, okay, so a couple of questions. The regarding the railing design.
In the report?
I know it's in the report. It's in the plans too, but I don't have the.
It would be sheet A 2.4.
Yeah. Okay, so yes. So looking at the proposed west elevation, the new stairs, wrought iron railing, just in terms of curiosity, is that being referenced from somewhere on the house in terms of the general design?
Yeah, I think it's the same as the front door gate. If we could pull the photos of the front and confirm.
Okay, that was one question. The other question I had was on the cut sheets here for the roof. Is the roof and the sconce, are those both shots from the house for exterior sconce?
Could you pass those?
Yeah. Or are those just stock photos? Because they didn't seem to be. They don't seem to be in kind with the house.
The exterior sconce is a photo from the house. But the tile is a mistake.
What? I'm sorry? What?
The
roof tile.
That's hilarious. I just wanted to see if you were paying attention, actually.
Well, I wasn't, but Commissioner Reyna was. He got it.
Yeah, I said, I've never seen that pattern before.
And we're not proposing any difference, any change
Yeah,
to the
it's the
existing.
same as the, okay.
For sure.
And that's not a photo of the house tile.
Okay.
Somebody's going to get a stern talking to when you get back to the office.
Then, was there any?
Bad.
Was there any consideration in looking at the original elevations on the historian report? Then page 2 of Edward Plunkett and Howells. On the front, it shows very well may or may not have been any evidence whether it was originally done this way, but it's a very Edwards and Plunkett sort of plaster flare on the window, top and bottom, and then with the wrought iron in between. They had that sort of swoopy treatment that they do a lot. It isn't showing, and on the photos it's not that way anymore. Was there any evidence that it ever was that way? That front, right next to the front door.
No, unfortunately. We looked for older photos, and actually the earliest really clear photo of the house was from the 90s. I mean, it showed that. And there's a number of changes, including to the roof configuration. So it would seem that some of those design elements were likely not installed, because on the rest of the house, it just seems they added stuff, but they weren't taking things away.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they were just changes between design and construction.
Okay. So that's it for me, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Drury.
I have a question. It's just
Yeah.
perhaps visual, but on page A2.2 of the report, the existing and proposed east elevation, is there a subtle break in the roof line of the second floor?
A break where?
Well, it looks like there'd be a break even with the
Here it is.
the north-facing roof, the south-facing roof, which is the long one, right? It looks like there's
Yeah, it's a split pitch.
Beautiful little, what is it?
It's a split pitch.
Split, I'm going to write that. See, I'm not an
Oh.
architect, so.
It's broken.
It's a broken pitch, yeah.
Say it, wait a minute. Say it again, please.
It's just a different pitch. It goes from maybe a 3 and 12 or a 3.5 and 12 to a
It's
3 and
really-
12.
It's really important. Yeah.
It's really beautiful, actually.
It's really beautiful.
Yeah, isn't it cool?
Okay, well, that was my question.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Mr. Mahan.
I'm looking at the, let's see, what
2.1?
page? I'm looking at page, I don't know what page I'm looking at. I'm looking at page A2.4. And I'm also looking at page A2.1. The trellis coming off of the office, you're changing that, right?
No, that's existing.
So it looks like on page A2.1, it looks like it's supported with like 8x8 posts. And then on A2.4, it looks like it's supported by stucco columns.
The stucco columns are existing, and I don't know where you're finding posts, but the posts are from where's the discrepancy, Bill?
A2.1?
A2.1, the bottom is what is exactly there.
Oh, this says proposed, and this says existing. Right?
Right.
That's because what you're seeing is that lattice shed that we're removing, and there's the post beyond. And so the shadows.
Oh, I see.
So what's happening is
Okay. Okay, yeah, okay, I see that now. The other question that I have is, and I can't find didn't you show an original plan of the original Edwards and Plunkett plan?
Yes.
It's in the back of the report. the
I
last
can't
appendix.
seem to find it.
Very last sheet.
Where? That's not a plan, that's a foundation plan.
Second to last sheet.
It's on the other side.
Yeah, they're double-sided.
They're
so-
double-sided.
Yeah, this is a question, but it really leads to a comment. But did you notice that Plunkett's, by the way, I love your doors that you want to redo the doors, but did you notice that they're trifolding doors?
On the original design?
Yeah.
Yeah, we noticed that. And we
you-
can't do that.
Why that is, though? You can't swing a door out into an arch.
Exactly.
So what are you going to do about that?
We're going to make it look like the original doors, but it's going to be a sectional.
But it's going to be a what?
A sectional.
It will be sectional and it'll go up? You answered my question, thank you. Oh, the other question I had is just this little addition of, I guess it would be on the north, that looks like it doesn't have a tile roof on it. It's
We're adding a tile roof on that.
putting tile roof on that?
Yeah.
So that, you're not showing that on the proposed, but maybe you will eventually.
Oh, it
Right-
didn't.
Right there.
Yeah, it should have shown up as getting a new tile roof because it's
Just
an
a-
anomaly and it,
Blame the computer.
but it, yeah, I'm going to blame that.
That tile?
That tile.
Yeah, we're going to put that tile in there. No, no.
Okay,
But they definitely want to put tile on that roof.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
No, sir.
Can I say one quick thing, Bill?
Mr. Grumbine?
Yes, one more question. For the new proposed structure on, that's the elevation that I want to look at.
The page?
It's the little guy, the little structure down below. Accessory structure, A2.1, in the far left corner. What's the pitch on that roof, and where are you getting it from? The new gym.
I think we just matched the existing pitch of the existing roof.
Because it looks like it's matching the existing pitch of that other little building with the trellis, and I think it might be a little too shallow.
You think it's matching which one?
It looks like it's matching the little building on A2.4, the little studio. And that wasn't original Edwards and Plunkett, right?
No, it was not.
That was the later, yeah, okay.
It's supposed to match the pitch of the existing
Main roof?
main roof.
Okay.
And I'll make a note of that to make sure that it does.
If we make that comment. If we agree upon that comment.
If you agree on it.
That's right.
Oh, can I just say one thing, Bill, that I forgot that Chuck would probably want me to say about the landscaping is, and this would maybe help Kellum understand the landscaping is, right now, it's a hodgepodge of a bunch of
Materials.
ratty, differing kind of materials like some dead Mexican sage and some aeonium that's really old, and now it's become really spindly.
Is it historical?
And I'm not sure if it was part of the original landscape plan, but it's outlived its lifespan.
You're going to refresh the landscape.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's fine.
Thank you. Comments? Mr. Grumbine, you seem ready?
Sure. All in all, I like it. I think it's a very sensitive to the historic resource, and I think it's going in a very good direction. And yeah, I could be very supportive of it. I would say with that gym structure, that I do think it looks off from the house, and I would want it to match the house as opposed to the other in the stronger pitch before it kicks. And so that would be my vote if others would agree. The wrought iron I do like, especially that it looks the railing looks very close to the actual original historic one, which was shown in drawing at least, which I'm sure it wasn't the 42-inch that's up there right now, or 36 that's up there right now, whatever that is, that tall one that's existing. But it was very, very low, and so I think that you've done a great job of kind of capturing that as well. And then the wrought iron, I don't know if the drawing shows the wrought iron lamps, the one or two that are there, as being sort of more of a typical Spanish, and the one that you had photos of, I don't. It seems a little off to me in terms of the of an Edwards and Plunkett, and I don't know if it was original or if you can find out if it was. But I would say that steering towards whatever the most original you can find is.
It's not original.
Okay.
We're going to replace that.
Okay.
If it's okay with you.
So those are my comments.
Okay. Mr. Mahan.
Yeah, I'm positive about this. I think it's very nice. I question the new windows in the gym, and I guess it says a new window in the office too. They're broken up so much. Why are you breaking them up so much? If you look on page A2.4.
Oh.
I think it must have been a reference to the original house breakups.
I'm looking at the original house. I don't see that they're broken up that much, and
yeah, that's a good comment, Bill.
Generally speaking, the the Spanish did not break up their windows as much as the French did. When you talk about a French door, you're talking about, 15 lights or something like that. And when you look at a Spanish door, I'm thinking of the very beautiful ones on the Libero, there may be, they just have horizontal, and then maybe there's 4 or 5 lights. And I think getting this so busy is, I don't know why you would want to do that. And I think it would be, not functional from the inside, and I think it's just too busy from the outside. But generally speaking, I think it's a nice thing that they're doing to this property.
Mr. Drury?
Yes, I would concur with Commissioner Mahan's comments on the number of lights in those 2 windows. But I also want to ask a question, I'm sorry. On the last page of the beautiful drawings, the detail of the bumper of the garage door, is it still like that?
You mean of the existing, the buttresses at the base of the wall?
Yeah.
I believe they are, but.
But the,
Yeah,
they are.
Yeah, they are.
They are.
I just wanted to double check and look.
Yeah, isn't it?
Yes, those are.
Very
existing.
Plunkett.
Thank you
Yeah.
for including these drawings. They're just lovely. And I think that this is one of those kind of secret houses because you look at it and you go, oh, what a nice house, but you don't realize how much is on the side you can't see. And I very much appreciate leaving that elevation alone. Thank you.
Mr. Vania?
I agree with everything that's been said as far as that goes, including the tile. But I'd like to see more elaboration on the landscape plan, and I have some comments regarding some of the plant materials that are in here. So perhaps when they resubmit, that they can have a more definition as to where these plants that are listed, where they're going, or key them out. And as far as the palm trees are concerned, I'd like to see some other variety of palms. This variety of palm, in time, I think will be out of scale regarding the building. Just looking a little bit down the future, and a variety of palm that may be more in keeping or in scale, and stay in scale might be more appropriate.
Okay.
Mr. Suding?
Yeah, I concur with Commissioner Vena's comments. I'd like to add, though, that the plan should show if there are any existing trees to be removed or not.
That one. It needs to show it.
That's all that I have, Mr. Chair.
Help yourself. Mr. Chair, not to be disagreeable, but I wanted to bring up one issue of the windows. Although I definitely agree with Mr. Mahan in general in terms of the window divisions, in looking at both the original drawings and a lot of the stuff that's existing, there does seem to be, first of all, vertical proportion to the lights, and there does seem to be a lot of divisions, even with small windows, more so than normal, I would say, than for Spanish colonial. I do think there might be a hint. I can't tell whether this is a bad just from the copy itself or not, but and whether it exists in the original. But on the east elevation, on the second to last page, there is of the original Red Rivers and Plunketts. It's page their sheet number 2, east elevation in top left corner. That might be a possible solution to a similar type of window layout, where there's a picture window in the middle. It's not the same proportion as just the center one for the gym, but there's a picture window in the middle and 2 side operable side lights, and those are subdivided, but picture windows kind of open. Anyways, I just wanted to kind of throw that in there as the window question goes forward.
Pretty disagreeable.
Just to be disagreeable.
Speaking
Just so
of
there's
which,
not
my own
consensus.
comments.
Talk about disagreeable.
Speaking of disagreeable, actually having multiple breakups is more American colonial. The French used as large a piece of glass as they could possibly find or afford when they could. But I do agree that it is perhaps too busy for this period and style of house, and that you should emulate the one shown on the original Plunkett drawings as being more appropriate, particularly for the picture windows. I also disagree with the handrail. It looks very contemporary to me, and of the period that if it was stair-stepped would be much more in keeping with other Plunkett things, or a solid rail entirely.
Say solid stucco?
Solid stucco rail with a really nice curve at the end would be much more Plunkett.
Okay.
Than this sort of hybrid thing, or stair-step it. But a solid rail would be much more Plunkett, particularly with a nice volute at the end.
A solid plaster low
Solid
wall.
plaster.
Not a rail at all.
No, a plaster wall,
With a handrail
12
on the inside.
inches thick, with a nice curve at the end.
Yeah.
To summarize the comments, the proposed changes are sympathetic to the historic resource and agreeing with the findings in the in the report. The board is grateful for the original drawings to compare. I hear the consistency with the accessory building should have a steeper pitched roof, that all additions should have tile roofs, and the appropriate two-piece tile roof as required. The lamp shown is not appropriate to this building, and something more Hispanic should be used. Let's see. Okay, show on the plans at the next presentation, key location of plants. A different variety of palm trees is suggested, requested. And indicate any existing trees or significant large landscaping to be removed.
Mr. Chair?
Anything else?
Window
Mr.
break
Chair?
cups.
I did say that.
He did, that was one of the first, I think.
Yeah, they should emulate the Plunkett drawings. Mr. Suding?
Yeah, I'm ready to make a motion with the inquiry as to changing the landscape comments a little bit. Key the species of landscape plants to the symbols, or excuse me, landscape plants to the symbols. And study using different variety of palms that are more in scale with the building. And I'll make an indefinite continuance to return to the full commission for the project. So that takes care of the motion for 5A. And then I will make a
No. Can I have a second?
Oh, sorry.
Second.
Under discussion, drop the word study.
Pardon me?
From study, alternate palm trees are requested.
For the scale of the building.
Understand where that is? Got it?
Did you add the solid low wall in lieu of the railing on the back? Is that one?
Did you get the comment about the solid railing?
About the solid rails?
Yes, you got that? Okay. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Second motion to approve the report.
So
I'll
moved.
make that motion.
Mahan, Suding second?
Second.
No, Suding seconded already. Any discussion? Comments that again, an exhaustive and thorough report. Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I hear no in opposition, so the motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want your report back? Or you want us to recycle it?
Yes, that'll be fine.
You keep that report. Don, you keep that report.
Mira Vista? Mira Vista Avenue?
It'll just,
Our next item is item number 6. 1809 Mira Vista Avenue. You come forward, please.
I just want to note that that was back in the good old days when a house took three pages to do.
And notice the total lack of information on the drawings. And also note that they didn't bother to even look at the drawings when they were building it.
The builder turned the garage and everything.
If you would introduce yourselves for the record, please.
I'm Tom Henson from Becker Henson Nixto Architects. This is Pamela Post, Post Hazeltine.
Thank you. We have a letter from Nicole.
I just evaluated the house to our historic resource guidelines because the report's not done yet, so just to give you some guidance that it meets our guidelines. The alterations that are proposed this is just their first one-time concept review to get the feeling of the commission.
Okay. So this is prior to a report
Yes.
to follow. Understood. Are there any questions of Nicole for her evaluation? Seeing none, any comments? Other than good job? So moving on to the report, please tell us what you want to do.
So our clients are actually in escrow to purchase this house now, and before they buy it, they wanted to make sure that they could reconfigure some areas so it would work for them. And we wanted to get the board's feelings on what we wanted to do. And if for any reason it wasn't going to work, they're not so far along that they couldn't back out of escrow.
Good.
So this is just a...
So the house was built in 1925. It was designed by Sewell Murphy Hastings, and it was added on to twice, once in 1970 and once in 1989. It was being built in the 20s. The kitchen was for servants, not the owners, and that's the main issue. The kitchen faces the street now instead of the ocean view. We want to turn this into a family house instead of a house for where the servants would stay in their area and the family would stay in theirs. So currently there's a kitchen in the front and a big mudroom laundry room in the back, looking at the backyard and the ocean view. And we want to flip-flop that. We want to move the kitchen to face the backyard and put the laundry room in the front. And we also want to add about a 400 square foot breakfast family room, so the kitchen and family room can act as a piece and the formal living room can stay nice. There's also currently almost no connection to the backyard. There's one stairway out of the music room. It's steep and there's no patios at all. So we also want to add terrace on the rear side of the house and more ways to get down. We're doing almost nothing to the front of the house. The only change at all would be currently there's about a 1.5 car garage, which doesn't work for the owners, the proposed owners, and we have an extra 5 feet to the setback line, so we're proposing widening the garage 5 feet so 2 cars can fit. We're reconfiguring the master bath area to bring it up closer to current standards. We're proposing adding a second bathroom on the second floor. And in the 70s, a big plexiglass skylight was added over the entry hall, and we're proposing taking that out and adding a dormer to match the existing. We're proposing enlarging this dormer on the back side of the house and adding a dormer in the proposed bathroom for light. The only change on the front of the house is the wider garage doors.
There's a pointer here is what I'm looking for. Use that, please.
So existing was really a 1.5 car. It's 16.8 wide, and we're just widening it. And there are 7 or 8 steps up to the house now, and you have to go outside, which is not ideal. So we're raising the garage so you can get straight from the garage into the house, but still keeping the roof line lower and subservient. So this is how the house looks now, and we're mirroring the two masses on the east side to the west, but shrinking them down because they're less important. This is the living room, and this is the kitchen, this is the proposed family room, and then we're adding a terrace. We'd like to have an iron railing. There is iron in Tudor houses. It's much better for the view and for maintenance. Our issue is the house is currently at almost 100% FAR, or 98% as the house sits now. We're proposing to add about 560 square feet to make the kitchen and family room work, and that would put us at 110% FAR. The lot is over 15,000 square feet, though, so it's discretionary. It's not a hard and fast rule. And if the board feels that it's somewhat in keeping with the character of the house, it's not a problem. One thing that counts against us with our FARs is someone poured a slab in two areas in the crawl space. They're really just mechanical pits, but since it's a slab and the ceilings, it's walkable, the city counts that as toward our FARs. So if you would take that out, we're at 102%, which seems appropriate in our estimation. The roof is really bad. It's got a cal shake. It's leaking. It doesn't look that good. We found a new material. It's called cedar, and you almost can't tell the difference between this and real shake. And the house originally had a real shake roof, which we can't do now because of fire code. Everything would be, all the details would be matched exactly. The windows are leaded glass. The new windows would be leaded glass. French doors. Stucco would match existing. The intent would be to have it look as if the house had been built this way from the beginning, with a few key differences, so you can tell what the original was and what the proposed is.
Okay.
That's the bulk of.
That's it?
Have anything to add, Pam? Or?
Anything to add?
No, well, we met with the architect and the owners, and Tom basically went over just as is explained to you, and both Tim and I found that these changes were sympathetic. Most of the changes are taking place on the rear of the property, in which there, of course, is also ample room. And we think that the characteristics of, what they're, as far as the materials in regard to the terrace and the railing, is something that are in keeping with the Tudor revival. So we find that they're quite contextual and acceptable in our estimation.
Thank you.
So the owners are going to buy or not buy the house based on your feelings. No pressure.
Where's the realtor?
We're going out for
dinner? Change the car. Okay, thank you. Staff, anything to add? No. Questions from the commission? Mr. Drury?
I have no questions, but I have comments.
Okay, Mr. Mahan, questions?
Yeah, I'm not understanding these elevations. If I can have the pointer. So, this chimney looks like it's coming out of this big hip roof.
Yes.
But let's see, where's the?
Oh, I'm sorry, thank you.
Here.
Here it looks
Oh,
like
the hip roof is
like it's
behind. That's actually coming out of the shed.
coming out of, and I don't.
This is the shed.
I don't see that shed over here.
This is the shed here. This piece, that line is the kink where it goes from a steep gable to a shallower gable. That's the
I see
the
this,
shed.
this is that, and then
Yes.
so that ridge is this ridge here.
You're right. You're right though. Yeah, it's a break. This line should be coming down. The hips behind.
Okay, it's
yeah.
coming out, so it's coming out of that.
It's coming out of the shed. Yeah, good catch.
Mhm. I haven't counted these, but it looks like this is the house of 7 gables. Okay, well, that answers my question.
It's 6. It's actually 6, but we can add one more.
I have to interrupt the meeting. Open the meeting to public comment. I have no speaker slips, so I will close public comment. Back to commission for questions.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Suding?
Is the south elevation visible to the public at all?
No.
I'm Tim Hazeltine. You can see it, but you have to get actually south of Mira Vista, and it gets, as of course, the farther down you get on the Riviera, the smaller it becomes. So you just see that you can see the massing of it, but no details at all.
Just the upper part.
The upper part.
So
'cause of
not the understory.
Because of the
Exactly.
slope.
Okay,
Yeah, it's a very
thank you.
steep
I
slope.
figured as much. I just
Yeah.
wanted to ask the question. Thank you.
Mr. Payne, any questions? Mr. Grumbine, any questions?
One question is regarding the square footage. Is that air conditioned space at all down in the
No,
the slab
it's
area?
really, it's just crawl space.
And
It's cleaned up crawl space.
Oh,
it has air, yeah.
air conditioned space another way.
Want to see the?
Okay, yeah. No, I saw the photos, but it was just I'm just curious as to why exactly that was still.
The city said technically, if we demoed the slab, we'd be okay, but we really don't want to do that. It doesn't help anybody.
Yeah.
I have another question, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Mahan?
Yeah, in terms of compatibility, I mean, this is a very large house and a large FAR. What is the neighborhood like? Is this, are the neighboring houses of this size and scale?
It varies. We don't know exactly. We had a hard time finding exactly. I mean, this house was listed as 1,000 square feet under what it actually was, and that's been our experience. So when we check neighboring houses, there was another one at 99%, there was one at 80%, but most of the other ones were more in that range or lower. Smaller, but we don't know how accurate that is. We suspect they're actually more. In almost every case, if we go further, we'd find that, as in the house, as in this case, like over 1,000 square feet had been added that the assessor didn't know about.
I have one question. Has the lot been subdivided already?
It has. This is an empty lot, but it goes with.
This was once part of the garden. I know this house quite well, actually.
Yes.
A lovely garden, a lovely rose garden, as I remember. Comments from the commission? Who wants to start? Mr. Drury.
I guess my comments would be, good job. I would also say that some articulation needs to occur on the garage. It looks like it's a catwalk. I know that there's an architectural mathematician, and I think that the way it sits now, it looks like, oh my gosh, we need to make that bigger. It doesn't seem to fit quite with the house yet. I think that there's ways to get that done, whether it's some details, maybe a dormer, I'm not sure. But yeah, that's right there. It looks like it's stuck on. The other one, you could say the same for the existing, except it's smaller. So that large roof area kind of
I think you're right. We could add a dormer or something to make it. Now that there's more area.
I mean, in real life, the chimney is going to be going to have some articulation as well. It's going to change that elevation too. But I think that the line as drawn on the proposed needs some additional detail. Otherwise, I think it's very commendable. We'd like to read it.
So that was a question, comment? That was a comment. That's fine. Mr. Mahan, comments?
I think I can support the addition. I think when we get into the nit and grit, we're going to want to make some changes maybe to some of these roof forms. I'm particularly looking at the south elevation, and it just seems like there's too many gables. There's too much repetition in this. It seemed like that would need to be worked on and studied, but generally speaking, I don't see that the addition that you're making to a reasonable garage in this breakfast family room is. I think it's supportable.
Mr. Suding.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I concur with the comments made. Nicely done. Looks like you have a new house.
Mr. Vania,
Nothing to add.
Mr. Grumbine.
I think the design-wise and the layout-wise, I think that's all great, all good. I mean, yeah, there's gonna be massaging that happens, but the only thing that I would be a little bit cautious about is as long as there were some other examples that you can point to in the relative close vicinity that meet those criteria for pushing or exceeding the FAR, then it would be very easy to support. If there's a lot less or none, then it would be at least a tougher case. So I think I can still support it probably, and the design-wise, I think this is a nice way of going, where you're adding the square footage and in general how you're adding it.
I know this house quite well, actually. I've been in it a few times, about 6 years ago. It's a magnificent house. It's beautifully done. When I saw it, it needed a dusting. It appeared to be in original condition for the most part and pretty untouched, which is either good or bad if you like Tudor architecture. And I appreciate that you've done a very good job of adding on to this structure. The only thing that jumps out at me as being not suitable to this building is how you've treated the terrace. And it needs to look more like a Tudor terrace. So either corner piers between the wrought iron, some articulation of the base, perhaps the use of brick up on the wall surface. Just something to make that look like an understory of a Tudor parterre. And to summarize the comments, that we find the proposed addition appropriate to the size, bulk, and scale of the neighborhood, appropriate to the style of architecture, appropriate to our historic guidelines, and appreciate the fact that most of the changes have been done to the rear elevation and not the street elevation. Consider the enlargement of the garage appropriate to the scale of the house. And then as the design develops, would like to see further study of the roof line and breaking up of the large roof mass of the garage addition. Otherwise, generally favorable comments. And
Thank you.
I believe that's all we need to do.
Yep.
Congratulations.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Good job. Thank you. Hi. Good. Next item is item number 7, 125 State Street. This is the Children's Museum of Santa Barbara. This is a rooftop art installation.
We get a big one this time, huh?
It's okay. Sometimes you got to do that.
Let's see, where's one? One, starting at the bottom and going up. Right there, right there.
Okay.
This is 2 right here.
Yep.
The art installation.
Get on the back.
Or down the street.
One of these in there.
Bridge.
7.
This was last in front of us on January 11th. We had a motion to continue for 2 weeks with the comments to provide photographs from around the site, including pedestrian level, adjacent street level, and adjacent properties at the level of the rooftop. provide a site plan showing where the photographs were taken. And then to notify the adjacent hotel of the installation of the equipment and their opportunity to examine it, provide an operational letter stating the hours are anticipated for rooftop events in the evening. It's suggested the commissioners visit the site, limit the rooftop exhibits to those proposed, and any replacement thereof. The motion carried unanimously. Do I have staff comments by any chance? Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, actually, Chair, I just wanted to comment that we would like the HLC to focus on the physical improvements that they're proposing and not so much on the operational aspect of it. This project did go to Planning Commission, and they didn't impose any conditions or restrictions on the use of the roof. So
Okay.
That's our recommendation.
Okay, thank you very much. Gentlemen, introduce yourselves and do your presentation, please.
Great. My name's Clay Arell, with architect with AB Design Studio.
Steve Hinckley with Moxie.
Great. So we're here today, continued item. I know some of you are looking at the photos. I wanted to address a couple things. We did a couple of the items on your list here. I just wanted to hit first. The first item is number 6, limit the rooftop exhibit to those proposed and any replacement thereof. Part of the program of this will be over time, exhibits will change and so on and so forth. It'll go through the same review process likely that we've done today. So we're not, right at this moment, we're proposing what you see here. If we need to come back or if something changes in the future, we'll be back before you as well discussing those. So we don't want to put any imposition on the museum for changing things out unnecessarily, so we hope we can move that forward. We did, item number 3, we did discuss this with the adjacent hotel owner, and I believe that they were not interested in really going up on the roof and checking it out at this time, but they did provide a letter of support. I believe you have that, that they're fine. And we do have a photograph from this second floor deck that you see right here, looking up at the museum, which I will try to locate on one of these drawings. So on G.02, you'll see images. I'm sorry, Mr. Commissioner.
22, 25, 30?
My eyes aren't going bad. 22 is here, and 25 is here, and 30 is there. So from this vantage point, which is a second floor deck at the hotel, you can't see anything but the side of the building.
The adjacent hotel is lower than your roof
Quite a
deck.
bit, yes, quite a bit.
Yes, I think that wasn't clear last time. Here it shows it. Looking at photograph 17.
Or 19 might help
Or
too,
19.
Mr. Chair. It's
Actually, 19
Yeah.
is better. So their windows are looking into a blank wall, basically.
more or less.
With an awning above.
This wall, I think the question at the last hearing was how far away that is. It's roughly about 12 feet, and the ground floor rooms on the hotel step back even further, so these are more around 18 to 20 feet.
Okay, thank you. Gentlemen, if you're going to have a side conversation, you need to mute your speakers.
I'm not sure, your comment number 5, it was suggested the commissioners visit the site. I'm not sure if anybody did, but we have ample photos here to orient you.
Yes, you do.
And I'll point out, I'm going to go back to the first page here. So one of the things that we've done is we've mocked up these exhibits on the roof. So as was discussed before, we've got the water exhibit here, and there's the piano music exhibit, there's a windmill exhibit. Did I call that the right thing? I'm probably butchering the names. And then a few mobile things that are on wheels. I do have these as well that we can look at that show a little bit more color renditions of the exhibits that are planned for the roof. This is the water exhibit here that you see. Can I slide this over, Mr. Chair? Just this that you see here. That's this exhibit.
TB, could you zoom in on this, please? No? Okay.
Maybe you're not on.
Lift it up higher.
Smartest one in the bunch right here.
That works. Thank you. I now know how to get their attention. Thank you.
This exhibit that you see is fairly low in terms of what the exhibit is. It does have this higher point here. Part of what we're showing, and we mocked this up, so what we're showing in a lot of the photographs is where you can see anything from the public way and the adjacent streets and things of that nature. There was a comment about getting up on roofs of other buildings. We were unable to get up on some of these construction roofs. So we focused mainly on vantage points, excuse me, I'm going to slide that over, viewpoints from here along Kimberly Avenue in the back, along Mason Street, which is pretty far away. I don't know what that distance is, but it's got to be close to 500 feet. And then up along this side of the street as well, and as well as down here by, what's that street? Yananali.
I think we're more concerned with State Street.
And from
which
the train,
we have
some
across
from
the
the train
top
station.
and the train
too.
station.
So here's an exhibit where you see this little orange arrow is where you're seeing one of our mock-ups. So this little faint dot that you see there is actually a mock-up of this, of not the piano exhibit, but the windmill. I'm sorry, I'm getting that wrong. This one, it is the piano one. So this one has a height of 10 feet, 2 roughly.
Is it these?
Oh no, it's this one. I'm sorry. It's the 12-foot one. So this is a mobile exhibit. So a couple of these here are mobile. So from 15, which is here, you can see a little faint line here. This thing that you're seeing in this image, and sorry it's so small, is one of the trees that are planted along the edge of the planter. So there's several trees planted along these edges and along these edges that are part of the original architecture, what was approved originally. So over time, those are going to fill in and grow and help as well for screening. So
There is landscaping in that edge planter, is
that's
there not?
correct. All along the north side here, and as well as this corner has all
Okay.
plantings in there. So, and of course, it's not mature
It's
yet.
young yet.
But that'll eventually get some height and help with screening of those types of elements.
I think we understand.
Okay, you want me to keep saying it over and over again?
No, I think we understand.
So anywhere you see, if we're looking, if we're looking at this orange arrow, anywhere you see one of those is where you actually see one of the exhibits on the roof.
Okay.
I'll come back to. Let's go to. The other one I wanted to show you was this image number 9, which is actually taken from the corner of Yananali and State. So this is the tower, and there's these elements, and we mocked them up. These are the, take that off. So these are the radar guns and periscopes and different items that are going to be for viewing out of those areas. And so those are mocked up here. So these photographs show, and the lighting's a little bad on this one, they show how you can see those or where they're located. And actually, Steve has a great photo he took today with a little bit more of a zoomed in viewpoint. We'll just throw those out. Yeah. So here's the tower. This is from down in front. This is basically the mock-up here that you're seeing of those elements. And they get pretty well screened by the railing of the tower itself. So we don't think those are going to be really a visual impediment, and they're going to be a darker color, which will help blend in with the railing as well.
So one of the things also, if I may add, that came up at the last review was what the colors were going to be up on the rooftop. As it turns out, the paddles, which appear on this set of drawings as being different colors, green, orange, and yellow, they're actually white in reality. And the pedestals that were mocked up here and have now actually been installed, this is a photograph of, this is post-installation, so the actual thing is actually in here now. Those are gray, and any of the, yes, these pedestals are all gray. And one of the other elements, the tallest one that Clay pointed to.
Back here.
It's okay. that appears to have a yellowish color up on top is actually not that color. It is just silver. It's all steel.
Thank you.
Talked about those. One other thing that I wanted to show is on the elevations. So, pardon me, I'm going to move some of this out of the way so we can get to those. Let's see. By the way, this was the HLC approved roof plan that shows these exhibits originally. So this had already gone through the process. Since then, we've removed a lot of these exhibits and scaled it back. So I brought this just for context if we had to look back at that for any reason. Also shows the plantings. One of the things that, so these elevations were produced by the exhibits people who are constructing them. And one of the things that we noticed on there from before was that these parapets weren't the right height. So one of the things, this is the location of that water
That's the water feature.
feature, and this tower piece that sticks up is that little piece here. So the actual parapet is up at this height here, and it was incorrectly drawn before, so that showed a lot more on the elevation, which we know is a flat 2D drawing in reality. And then on the side, again, this is higher here, and this has a lower glass side, but you can see where that thing actually sticks up a little bit on this side. But from visual public way, you really, as I already said 5 times, you really can't see it from anywhere.
Do you want to say it again? And
yeah, you really can't see it from anywhere. Did you say something?
Thank you. Are there any questions? Or,
Public comment.
oh, public comment, thank you. Any public comment? Do I have? No? I have no public comment speaker slips, so I will close public comment to the commission. Commissioner Drury, questions?
I have no questions.
Mr. Mahan?
No questions.
Mr. Suding?
Can you see this from
Mr. Vania?
Commissioner Suding, no.
Mr. Vania? Mr. Grumbine?
I do have one question.
Oh.
Why is the Mood Indigo folder bright orange?
They stole our brand
Because it's
color.
the contrasting color to Mood Indigo. That needs to go to
That's the
staff.
compliment.
This is the, this, under comments, this is the letter in support of the project from the adjacent hotel, which we asked for. They are gushing about it. Comments from the commission, Mr. Drury.
I think that that people on the parapet would be more intrusive visually than the exhibit. No, I mean, I'm just saying, they
They're
would be the
Well, it depends who they are.
Parents.
I'm trying to be serious. I'm not sure my speaker on. Here we go.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, I think this is terrific. I really appreciate this this photo montage. It brings the point home. Thank you.
And if you're standing on the parapet,
Mr.
we don't mind. It's
Okay.
Mr. Mahan.
Yeah, very, very nice presentation. I think you've certainly alleviated any concerns that I had.
Commissioner Sitting.
Thank you for all the visual tools you've provided. I don't have any issue with any of this.
Commissioner Vania.
I think it's going to be a very exciting facility. Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Commissioner Grumbine.
Yeah, echo the same thing. I just wanted to make sure there wasn't going to be like a cage that drops the mousetrap here.
Not yet. That'll be the next
I know
one.
that's not a question, but no.
Next phase.
Next phase. So to summarize the comment, we are in support of the project. Grateful appreciation for the exhaustive photographic representation of what's being proposed, and for the other just supportive material. A motion for final after final, project design approval and final.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
All those, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Congratulations,
Thank you
gentlemen.
very much.
Thank you very much for the
You're on your way.
Good having you
documentation.
guys all out there.
Okay. And when that comes back in front of us in 2 years...
With the mousetrap?
With the mousetrap, it'll all be your fault.
I'm going to give it a final on that second.
That can all go away.
Minutes, I think we're all through with that.
Yeah.
One sec, can I take the others?
You may, yes. Item number, that was item number 7. This is item number 8, 320 East Carrillo Street.
Yes. Yeah.
Long time ago.
No problem. I have minutes from this one, I believe. Is that what I'm looking at? Item number 7. Item number 8, I do. This was last heard on May 18th of 2016. There was a motion continued indefinitely to the staff hearing officer with the comments. The size, bulk, and scale of the modification of Scheme 2 are supportable. The details of the stone need resolution. The arch for the pedestrian entrance from the sidewalk needs more massing. The balcony rail needs to be more traditional and typical of downtown buildings. Massing proportions above the garage opening need to be reconsidered. Details will need to be flushed out and expected to be consistent with EPV guidelines. Start to consider landscaping, particularly for the front, potentially 2 trees flanking the building. The architectural style, selection of materials, and general direction of the colors are appropriate to the district and supportable. The motion was carried with me abstaining. If you'd introduce yourself and present your project, please.
I'm Ted Meter, I'm the architect for the project.
Welcome.
We are here for another conceptual review at the request of Susan Reardon, the staff hearing officer for the modification that we submitted for.
Oh, okay.
This project was heard on May 18th, and at the beginning of June, I submitted for the modification.
You need to get closer.
And turn it on, I think.
Is it on?
It is.
There you go.
It's on. Oh,
Now it's on?
now it's on.
I submitted for the modification in June of last year. I don't know, I'm sure if you're familiar with the process, but it takes about 3 to 4 weeks to get a pre-consultation meeting. And then after you have that, it takes another 3 to 4 weeks to get a submittal meeting. And then after I did that, I was told by Joanne LeConte that there was an extreme backlog and it would take another 2 to 3 months. And then right about at the end of that, Joanne LeConte went on leave for an extended period of time. I'm not even sure if she works here anymore. And so this project has been in a black hole waiting for this modification. Now, when I finally got to staff hearing officer meeting in December, Susan Reardon, who is now in charge of this, felt like she did not have enough information from the Historic Landmarks Commission as to whether or not these modifications to the side setbacks were supportable. So I am here today basically to repeat our last meeting and have this board state that the modifications to the interior setbacks and the massing are supportable so that I can go get this modification next week.
I have a clarification, Mr. Chair. So it's, one of the big comments was this was initially proposed and reviewed by HLC with just one mod under consideration. That was for the 3rd story, or for the 3rd floor. But when they reviewed it at show, the massing for the 3rd floor is 50% greater than the 1st and 2nd floor, so it's by our code that would change the setback requirements. So the mod is for the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd story now. So that's why that's the primary reason why it's returning to HLC for review.
So the mods are for the side yard
Yes,
setbacks?
and the requirement is if the 3rd story is over 50% of the 1st and 2nd story, then you need a 10-foot setback all the way. So
That was my next question, 10
Yep.
feet. So it's an encroachment of 4 feet on either side.
It's an encroachment of 10 on either side, so you need to have that 10-foot.
Yes, so they're asking for 6, so the
Yes,
encroachment is
absolutely.
4 feet. Okay. Clear. Thank you very much for that clarification.
Before we start, just to familiarize myself, is there an industrial building on the east side of the?
Yes.
Yes.
And we asked
Yeah,
that.
to push this building away from the residential use on the southwest side and push it toward the commercial 2-story zero lot line use on the northeast side.
Do we have neighborhood photographs in the file?
Do we have
From the previous photographs? Thank you.
These are not photographs, these are renderings.
Okay, do we have photographs? Do they show?
They just show a massing block.
Oh, I remember this one now. Okay,
I've just rendered them as concrete blocks.
that's fine. I do remember this now. Okay.
So this is the same massing that I showed you on May 18th, and this is the same set of drawings that I submitted in June for the modification. It's just that in the description of the project and the way it was noticed, Joanne only thought we were applying for modification for the top floor. But because this is a redesigned building, it did not meet the 50% or less for the top floor. So what?
Go ahead.
What I've done, let me just talk about the conceptual part, is we have taken what needed to be a 10-foot setback on this side. That's upside down here.
Where the industrial building, or
This side. And we have 6-foot setback for most of this wall and the part of the 3rd story, 8-foot setback over here, and a 10-foot at this terrace element. On the residential side of the project, where we have a 6-foot setback on the ground floor, that increases to 8, 10, and 12. So I'm trying to create a lot more space on this side because it's still a 1-story residential use, and also to try and create a little variety. The scheme that conformed with all of the setbacks was really a shoebox. It had no relief. It just went straight back. And that's what we're trying to get away from. The owner actually is happy with going through the modification. And part of that is that we need to develop the top floor to be 2 usable bedrooms. And those bedrooms right now are only 14 feet by 14 interior dimensions, so this is a highly constrained site. The top floor, the top floor is 915 square foot gross. And
let me ask you a question. The bottom floor is 3 stories on the street, but it's on the sides. Is it how much into the ground is it? Is it a basement? I guess is the question.
it's fully submerged in this scheme, except for the Carrillo Street slopes greatly from west to east.
Yeah.
Down. So on the uphill side, the new ground floor is about 1 foot higher than the existing house ground floor. The existing house ground floor is about 30 inches above grade on top of this 5-foot wall.
Okay.
And the new house would be another foot higher than that. But what I've done basically is taken where the driveway would come in and gone as flat as possible so that there's still positive drainage to the gutter, and located the ground floor there, and then just gone up 9 feet to the main floor.
Is there habitable space in the ground floor?
Yes. There's a 2-car garage, and at the back of that, there is a large bedroom or multipurpose room with bathroom downstairs, and it has a stairway to the rear, coming up to the rear patio here. And on the side of the house,
But it's buried under the ground.
it's buried, and the only light and air to that bedroom is through these arches and down through the stairwell.
Okay.
So it has an entrance, but it's really more about providing light and air so that it's a habitable room. It's not that we're trying to create a new entrance, so there is no entrance on that side. It goes straight to the backyard.
Okay, I think I understand. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Mr. Grumbine?
The date on the drawings is 6/03/15 is on all of them. Is that supposed to be 15 or 16?
That's actually the first date this project was submitted.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
The first time around.
Mr. Chair.
All right, that's it.
Mr. Sudi?
Is that it?
That's it for me.
Could you talk about the landscape, please?
This landscape is really, what's shown is just a
I
placeholder.
know, but you have landscape plans, right?
Did I bring landscape plans?
No. A2?
No, I didn't include them on this set.
Oh, okay.
This set was prepared for the modification.
Okay.
And
So we don't have A1.2
no, actually.
and A1.3. Okay.
I submitted them the first time around. But
okay.
I could talk about landscape. We're creating a planter at the street front to narrow the driveway to 16 feet, and also to there's a 5-foot site wall right at the back of the sidewalk, and the existing house has a 5-foot wall all the way across it. So we're removing that wall and the concrete stairwell that comes up from the sidewalk right at about the same point.
Okay. Are you providing any right-of-way planting in the public right-of-way? Any street trees or parkway plants?
The sidewalk there is 100% concrete, 10 feet wide.
From back of sidewalk to back of curb?
Yeah.
Thank you.
There's not even a tree well.
Well, that's another question is can we get a tree well? I mean, is there enough space there or there?
We can. That's actually outside of our property lines, but
yeah, that's often required as sort of mitigation.
yeah, I'm not trying to represent this as a finished landscape.
No, okay. That's all the questions I have.
Comments? Mr. Grumbine?
I think for what he's asking for, it's supportable. It seems very, it's the same as what it was before, right? So the only difference is that we didn't know to clarify that upper story, third floor, but almost second floor, 10-foot setback. So I can still support it the same way.
Okay, Mr. Pena?
I'm in accord with that. I don't have any other questions.
Mr. Suding?
Yeah, a couple of comments on the landscape. Look into providing a street tree in the parkway and a cutout that is approximately 4 by 8 feet. And then maximize the landscaping within the driveway, perhaps making that a planter there with a vine growing up over the arch. Perhaps the same thing on the other side. If you can make it work with your stairway, maybe you can't. But try and maximize the landscape, particularly in these areas that are not used as driveway or needed necessarily for passenger loading. So the comment is then to maximize the landscape at the driveway.
Got it.
Thank you.
Mr. Mahan?
Yeah, I'm supportive of these modifications. I think it becomes a better project than if it didn't require any modifications. We saw that at first. We didn't think it was appropriate. And I think this is we're all on board with this design.
Okay.
Okay, and as far as non-conceptual items.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Dury?
Eminently supportable. I think it's an attractive addition to the neighborhood. And I appreciate your sticking to it. Sorry you got
black hole.
Once you pay the fee, you got to go through it.
Yeah. Summarize the comments. That the commission still supports the modification in that the proposal is appropriate in size, bulk, and scale to the neighborhood, is generally appropriate to the EPV guidelines, and is generally consistent with development standards in the city. We would request that additional landscaping be placed in the driveway to mitigate the appearance of the third story, of the ground floor story, which this commission considers a basement. And the request for 2 additional tree planting wells in the parkway.
4 by 8, if you could.
And we would support a motion for an indefinite continuance back to the staff hearing officer.
Mr. Chair?
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Under discussion?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Could you add to the right-of-way tree planters that they be longer than they are wider, so that it maximizes air and water exchange?
Okay. Maker agree, seconder
Yes.
agree? Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. See you soon.
We need to keep everything you showed us. Thank you. I think we are adjourned.
Yeah, you.